Chapter 243. Like the last time, Li Tianlan woke up after sleeping for less than 3 hours. He was really sober. As soon as he opened his eyes, his fatigue and sleepiness disappeared completely. The light in the room was on. The soft light shone on the mottled walls, and the shabby furniture was faintly visible. It was still a long night outside the window. The rain was hazy, and the darkness and humidity filled every corner of Changdao. Li Tianlan was stunned for a while, then he slowly sat up and pulled out the infusion bottle in his hand. The pain in his body was still there. Those gunshot wounds and knife wounds of different depths were entangled with the drugs, stimulating his nerves. It hurt a lot. But it was comfortable. For Li Tianlan, it was comfortable not to be hungry or tired. After breaking through the limit, his willpower kept him sober and rational from beginning to end. In this state, Li Tianlan couldn't even faint. He was like the most perfect fighting machine. With a strong willpower that could break gold and crack stones, he only lacked physical strength. As long as he recovered a little, he would be able to break out the most powerful combat capability. But his injuries were getting worse. He could still fight, but no one was optimistic about the consequences if he continued. Even a machine could be completely damaged after overloading, let alone a human being. Li Tianlan stood up, looking calm. At least for now, on this battlefield where there was no rear, he was not qualified to think about other things. On the battlefield, to live was to kill the enemy, and to close his eyes was equal to death. As for the future? There was no rear on the battlefield, so there was no future. Outside the window, the night was dark and thick. Time passed slowly and steadily in the heavy rain. Li Tianlan looked out of the window. The 7th day was approaching. One more day, if everything went well, they should be on their way back to Zhongzhou State at this time tomorrow. But whether it went well or not, how many of them, the elites from Zhongzhou State, could go back? Li Tianlan turned and walked out of the door. The moment the door was opened, a slim figure put her hand on the doorknob, as if she wanted to come in. Li Tianlan's hand pulled the door inward, and the person outside the door pushed the door inward. Both sides were caught off guard. A soft and fragrant figure fell directly into Li Tianlan's arms, and her hand subconsciously hugged his waist. Li Tianlan's eyes turned cold for a moment. He almost instinctively wanted to take action, but he relaxed when he saw who it was. Sister Bai. He looked at Bai Yuming, who seemed to have not reacted yet, and took the initiative to greet her. Bai Yuming was obviously absent-minded. After a few seconds, she responded, "Ah, you're awake? How do you feel?" "Not bad." Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed because Bai Yuming had been in his arms and didn't want to leave until now. He changed the topic stiffly. "How is it outside?" "Not so good. I should say very bad." Bai Yuming shook her head and naturally stood up straight. She pinched Li Tianlan's arm and said with a smile, "Not bad. Although the injury is a little serious, your body is very strong." Li Tianlan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When he was about to say something, Bai Yuming had thrown the bag in her hand into his arms. "Put it on. Samsara sent it here 2 days ago and said it was for you. It's a good thing. In the current situation, safety comes first." Li Tianlan took the bag and felt that it was unexpectedly heavy, at least 7 or 8 kilograms. There was a white coat in the bag. The white shirt was slim-fitting and very long. Even though it was summer, it could already be considered a long trench coat. However, the clothes felt extremely cold to the touch, so it shouldn't feel hot when worn on the body. However, wearing such clothes on a summer day, Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he didn't know what to say for a while. This is cloud silk. Even in the dark world, it's a rare thing. It's warm in winter and cool in summer, and impervious to fire and water. Is it also impervious to swords and guns? Li Tianlan interrupted Bai Yuming with a bitter smile. More than that. Bai Yuming rolled her eyes at him. This thing can also absorb power. Few people under the thunder-shocking realm can break the defense of cloud silk. Even if I do it myself, the power transmitted to you through Cloud Silk will be weakened a lot. Cloud Silk is the highest-end material in the dark world, second only to murderous weapons. At present, only Zhongzhou State, Star State, and Snow Country can master this technology. Such a coat is all made of Cloud Silk. Not to mention whether Samsara's technology is up to standard, just for these Cloud Silk, I don't know how much blood they will shed. This kind of thing is likely to cause a battle between superiors of the invincible realm. She reached out her hand and flicked on the coat. There seemed to be wind and thunder in the air. Bai Yoming's slender fingertips flicked on the coat, but the pure white and soft fabric clearly made the sound of gold and iron, and even some sparks splashed. There are few of these things in Zhongzhou State. It's not that they can't make them, but it's a complete waste to use Cloud Silk to make clothes. If it wasn't for the fact that you're my younger brother, I might have kept these clothes for myself without telling you and Samsara. If I can take it back to the Bai family afterward, it can be regarded as the most precious treasure of the family. Bai Yoming's eyes were a little hot and envious. She suddenly tilted her head and said with a smile, "What's the matter with you and Qin Weibai? You haven't known each other for long, but that woman seems to be willing to give you everything without complaint or regret. Did she owe you in her previous life?" Li Tianlan laughed at himself, put on the coat, and didn't speak. The white coat was very close to his body, and on him, there was a kind of pure and slender charm. The feeling of the coat sticking to his body through the inner lining was cool and soft, with a trace of warmth, just like the body temperature of Qin Weibai when he held her in his arms. Unfortunately, it didn't have that natural and rich fragrance. Li Tianlan suddenly remembered that he hadn't smelled Qin Weibai's scent for a long time. He missed her very much. Li Tianlan gently touched the white coat on his body and said to himself, "I haven't seen her for a long time. If this retreat goes well, you should be able to see her in Huading at this time tomorrow." Bai Yuming said with a smile, and the seriousness in her eyes became clearer and clearer. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his head and looked at Bai Yuming. "Retreat? We can only retreat." Bai Yoming's tone was calm but a little unwilling. Li Tianlan didn't speak. He looked at Bai Yuming quietly, waiting for her explanation. Zhongzhou State was plotting against East Island. The momentum was so powerful that it shocked the whole dark world. From Huading to East Island, to Northern Europe, and then to North America, layers upon layers of arrangements, great efforts, and countless sacrifices were made. At this time, when there was no result, they actually wanted to retreat? Who could be willing? Most of the elites of East Island trapped in Huading have broken out successfully. Bai Yuming said blandly, "Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Sangchuan, the two grandmasters of the invincible realm, will probably arrive in Changdao tomorrow, and they will be followed by a large number of masters of the special warfare system of East Island. Tianlan, we can't do this." What could they do even if they were unwilling? The general trend was like this: who could do anything? We can race against time with East Island. Li Tianlan felt aggrieved. For Zhongzhou State, he might not have a clear sense of belonging, but for the first time since he entered the secular world, he did one thing with all his heart. Fighting, fleeing, and risking his life. All of this, at the most critical moment, he actually had to retreat. This kind of grievance really made him angry. There's no time. If we delay, we'll die. Bai Yuming shook her head and said in a cold tone, "The Heroes Club and the Polar Ground Alliance have already started to attack us. For the time being, we can't be sure whether they have reached an agreement with East Island or not, but the two invincible realm masters of East Island are about to return. If they can't get East Island, they will cooperate with East Island to suppress Zhongzhou State. This is very likely. But we can't afford such a loss, so we can only retreat." The Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club's attack was probably a precursor. Before things were clear, the five superpowers in the dark world had always taken an attitude of cooperation. Since the two superpowers attacked Zhongzhou State first, the other three superpowers would definitely show their attitudes. East Island and the five superpowers joined hands to attack Zhongzhou State. For the elites of Zhongzhou State in Changdao, this was completely a hopeless situation. Can we retreat? Li Tianlan quickly calmed down. He was silent for a while and suddenly asked. We need to sacrifice. You, Wang Xingxiao, and Gu Hanshan must go. The most elite and the youngest force, including me, must retreat as soon as possible. The others. Bai Yuming said dryly, but she didn't finish her words. She didn't need to finish her words. The others were naturally cannon fodder. But such cannon fodder was not those with weak strength, but those with the strongest strength, including several masters of the half-step invincible realm. Without enough strength, how could they cover their retreat? All the sacrifices are worth it. As if she was hypnotizing herself, Bai Yuming said, it's much better than being annihilated. Not to mention the others, just Li Tianlan and Gu Hanshan. If Wang Xingxiao and the other two died here, Zhongzhou State would lose 3 invincible realm masters in the next few decades. Such a loss was enough to damage Zhongzhou State's right to speak in the dark world to the greatest extent. So other people could be sacrificed, but these 3 young heavenly sons must be kept at all costs. No one knew how many people could retreat successfully this time. But as long as Li Tianlan and the other 2 could leave, Zhongzhou State would not be completely defeated. But even if the 3 of them could leave, what Zhongzhou State would face next would be the heaviest loss in recent decades or even hundreds of years. If this plan failed, Zhongzhou State's power in the dark world would greatly regress. But now the decision to retreat had been made, which was enough to show that Zhongzhou State was ready to face this consequence. Is there no other way? Li Tianlan looked at Bai Yuming and asked. Dressed in white, he stood straight in front of Bai Yuming. His whole body was filled with a kind of heart-palpitating sharpness. East Island has no other way but to find a way to make up for the loss in other places. Bai Yuming shook her head. Other places? Where? Li Tianlan's tone was sharp. A cold light flashed in Bai Yuming's eyes, and she said word by word, Annan State. In any case, the rebellion in Annan State could be said to be the beginning of Zhongzhou State from an advantage to a disadvantage. If Zhongzhou State wanted to make up for it, it could only start from Annan State. I can still fight. Li Tianlan's tone was low and determined. Bai Yuming took a deep breath and sighed. It's the general trend. Tianlan, you'd better go with the flow. It's the most important thing for Zhongzhou State that the 3 of you are alive. A phone suddenly rang. Bai Yuming took out her mobile phone and looked at it. It was a strange number. Surprised, she answered the phone and said, Hello. Well, it's me. Yes, Tianlan is here. You are? Oh. She spoke quickly and finally handed the phone to Li Tianlan. She said with a strange look in her eyes, Military Counselor of Samsara can't contact you, so he came to me. He should also advise you to leave. Li Tianlan frowned, took the phone, and said directly, I'm Li Tianlan. The phone was filled with the sound of violent rain. The rain hit the woods and made a pitter-patter. Li Tianlan suddenly had a feeling of palpitation in his heart again. It was like the palpitation and panic when he suddenly woke up on the back of tribulation, as if he had lost the most important thing. On the phone, Military Counselor's voice finally sounded, hoarse and tired. Young Master Li, the boss is missing in Chengdao. Li Tianlan's brain buzzed, and the whole brain became blank for a moment. In the night sky outside the window, a large piece of flashing thunder suddenly lit up the sky. In Li Tianlan's deathly silence, a thunderclap that seemed to split the whole Chengdao suddenly swept across the night rain. The thunder suppressed everything. The dim light in the room suddenly went out in the thunder. In the darkness, Bai Yuming subconsciously called Tianlan softly. There was no response. Bai Yuming's face changed. When she waved her hand, a piece of blue light lit up. Under the faint electric light, Li Tianlan's figure had disappeared. Bai Yuming, whose face changed dramatically, rushed out of the room as fast as she could. It was still raining heavily outside the room. The aftermath of the thunder shook the sky. The sky seemed to be covered with white. In the increasingly heavy rain, the late night of the 6th day was passing. Dawn was about to break in the sky. Chapter 244. Chilly wind. Cold rain. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. On the last day of the final battle, Changdao looked particularly manic and depressing at dawn. The boundless rain splashed in the high sky. In the raging wind and rain, the whole world seemed to become twisted and crazy in the darkness. A fierce white shadow crossed the temporary station of Zhongzhou State when the wind and rain were the most violent, and rushed out of the village. The heavy rain and cold wind were blowing in the air at the same time. At the moment when everyone was discussing how to retreat, everyone in the entire station of Zhongzhou State clearly felt the strong and almost suffocating killing intent. The white shadow crossed the sky, like a white rainbow crossing the night curtain in the heavy rain. Wherever the white shadow passed, the wind and rain all over the sky broke and dissipated. The air was vibrating, and the extremely fierce killing intent kept condensing. In a very short time, it reached the peak state that shocked most people. The retreating wind. The broken rain. The white shadow passed through the wind and rain. When it was about to rush out of the village, a black shadow suddenly began to condense in front of the white shadow. The sharp and arrogant sword intent almost unscrupulously swept through every corner of the space. Where the white shadow stood, the wind and rain retreated, but only this black shadow was condensing quickly and quietly, becoming clearer and clearer. The white shadow stopped on the way forward. The next moment, Tribulation and the black shadow changed positions and stood in front of the white shadow. The silver mask covered Tribulation's face. The Lord of Shadow in the dark world seemed to always be calm and cold, neither sad nor happy, neither arrogant nor rash. The heavy rain covered the old and shabby village below, and the mountains and forests not far away became blurred in the rain. The white sky began to fill the night. The light gradually brightened, but the place where the two stood gradually became blurred. "Where are we going?" Tribulation asked. Li Tianlan stopped. Dressed in pure white, he was hovering in the air at this time, with an indescribable style. Fierce, peaceful, determined, and proud. Looking at Tribulation in front of him, Li Tianlan bowed deeply, almost lowering his head to the ground. Above the sky, the greatest respect was nothing more than this. "Greetings, martial uncle." Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Tribulation's pupils contracted fiercely, and he didn't speak. He had not been in contact with Li Tianlan for a long time, but he thought he had some understanding of this martial nephew. Li Tianlan had never been so polite to him. Wasn't this kind of politeness and respect also another kind of resolution that didn't care about anything? "Where to?" After a moment of silence, he asked again. "Xiao Bai is missing." "I'll find her." Li Tianlan said lightly. "No." The silver mask covered Tribulation's expression. His eyes flickered slightly, and then he said resolutely, "We're already making a retreat plan. You're on the first list to retreat. Go back. If there are any clues, I'll bring Chief Qin back for you." Li Tianlan shook his head and said in a flat but unquestionable tone, "I have to go." It was raining cats and dogs. It was like a splash of water falling from the sky. All of a sudden, Li Tianlan's killing intent completely disappeared. Under the vast night sky, sword intent overflowed and countless raindrops fell rapidly. Dense sword qi whistled in every drop of rain. The raindrops became cold and sharp, and a gust of cold sword intent emanated from the rainwater without warning. "You want to fight me?" Tribulation's voice suddenly rose a little. His tone was still hoarse and gloomy, but his low tone spread through the night rain and instantly spread through half of the village. Everyone came out of their rooms and looked up at the two men who seemed to be confronting each other in the air. The young governor of Sai City. The deputy governor of Sai City. What were they going to do at this time? Li Tianlan looked at Tribulation quietly. He still didn't look angry, but there was a hint of complicated emotions in his eyes. He bowed deeply again and said calmly, "I don't want to." He said he didn't want to, but at the moment when they looked at each other, Tribulation saw determination in Li Tianlan's eyes. And only determination. Tribulation suddenly felt powerless. Qin Weibai actually came to Changdao. This wasn't part of the plan. What was more unexpected was that she disappeared in Changdao. In such a complicated situation, with Qin Weibai's importance, anyone who found Qin Weibai, who didn't know martial arts, would not let her go easily. It was a normal choice to take her away. Tribulation did not know this news. In fact, he knew it earlier than Li Tianlan. But now, not to mention that the cooperation between Samsara and Zhongzhou state seemed to be united, even if the two sides were still close, in such a dangerous situation, Zhongzhou state could only take care of itself first. Military counselor didn't wait for a clear response and support from Zhongzhou state, so he informed Li Tianlan. This was also understandable. Li Tianlan would definitely take action when he got the news. But if he took action, Tribulation wouldn't be the only one who had a headache. Tribulation thought for a while. He was not good at talking, and persuading people was not what he was good at. He slowly opened his mouth and said word by word, "In this situation, even if you get out of the way." Li Tianlan said directly before he finished. Qin Weibai's whereabouts were unknown, and he couldn't waste time. He couldn't afford to waste a second. He took a step forward. At this moment, Li Tianlan was high in the sky, but his whole body seemed to shine like a bright moon. "I have to go," he said firmly. "What can you do if you go? Where can you go now? The 5 dark forces and East Island are all suspected of taking Qin Weibai away. Are you going to check them one by one? Even if you go, can you bring her back?" Tribulation's voice suddenly became extremely cold. Li Tianlan didn't stop at all and went straight forward. "I can," he said softly in a casual tone, but behind this casual tone, there was almost desperate madness and confidence. He moved forward slowly. At this moment, everyone knew that as long as Tribulation didn't give way, this battle was doomed to be inevitable. Li Tianlan didn't want to take action, but it didn't mean he couldn't. He had to go. He had to go to the place where Qin Weibai disappeared at the beginning, meet with military counselor first, and then search for her bit by bit. In any case, he had to bring Qin Weibai back. Li Tianlan's expression grew calmer, but there were 2 balls of blazing fire in his eyes, with persistence and coldness that could burn him into ashes. At this moment, Li Tianlan didn't think about the Li family or the future. His mind was full of Qin Weibai. It was not her unparalleled beauty that could cause the downfall of countries and cities, nor was it her gentleness and strength in front of others. The two of them had never said sweet words or made vows of undying love. At this moment, what Li Tianlan recalled the most was Qin Weibai's every move and look when they were together. Those details that he had never cared about emerged bit by bit. Her eyes were as clear as water and as gentle as clouds. Whether it was charming or enchanting, whether it was cold or blurred, when that pair of eyes that were as bright as the Milky Way faced him, they always carried a kind of deep affection that was engraved into the bones, engraved into the depths of the soul. Li Tianlan chuckled. At the moment when he was about to pass by Tribulation, he solemnly told himself that he would never let her down even if he was smashed to pieces and doomed eternally. Tribulation stepped aside. Li Tianlan walked into the wind and rain. Without hesitation. "Have you ever thought about the consequences?" Tribulation's voice came from behind. "Outside the village, everyone is an enemy. Only you, only yourself. So what? If you don't come back, you don't come back." "Ha!" Tribulation was so angry that he laughed and said in a deep voice, "What will happen to the Li family in the future?" Li Tianlan's figure was about to disappear. His voice came from the front and was clear. "The existence of the Li family is to protect what we want to protect and what we deserve to protect. If I can't even protect my own woman, what's the point of the so-called Li family no matter how glorious it is? What does it have to do with me?" He landed on the ground. He walked out of the village and into the mountain forest. The sky gradually lit up with white light. The wind and rain were dark. Tribulation stood where he was, looking at the blurred distance. All of a sudden, the soaring sword intent brought with it a blazing flame and shot up into the sky with a loud bang. The sword intent tore the sky, and the fire spread wildly. In an instant, the raging fire covered the mountain forest in the heavy rain. The flames surged and rose against the trend. The fire rushed into the rain curtain like a torrent, illuminating the morning sky. Countless raindrops were flowing with flames, covering the mountain forest. The sky was raining fire. In response to the fire rain, there was a large expanse of ghastly and dazzling lightning. A large expanse of lightning spread and danced in the air, from high altitude to the ground. At the moment when the fire and lightning intertwined, a huge shock wave accompanied by a loud roar sounded in the mountain forest. There was a loud bang. Countless trees collapsed and burst into pieces. Li Tianlan's advancing figure retreated at a faster speed, or rather, flew back. Boom! His figure completely lost control and crashed into the village, crashing into a bungalow at the entrance of the village. The bungalow completely collapsed, and the dust was flying. Li Tianlan's figure directly sank into a large pile of stone bricks. Tribulation's expression was solemn. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the mountain forest. Gong Sun Qi, Firmament, and Gu Zhendong immediately appeared beside Tribulation. Before anyone could speak, there was a large number of footsteps in the mountain forest. The sonorous footsteps were deafening like thunder in the night rain. Boundless figures all over the mountains appeared from all directions of the mountain forest, like a crowd in the night rain. The black tide of people pushed forward, completely surrounding the village that was already endless. Silently, a figure seemed to step out of the void and stopped in front of Tribulation. Shinichi Miyamoto, who was wearing a black scarf and wearing a tight ninja costume, stood quietly in the void with a dagger in his hand. His soft voice, which sounded like he was murmuring to himself, resounded through the sky. No one can leave here today except the dead. Tribulation was silent and didn't say a word. In the crowd, he saw a lot of familiar figures. In the dense crowd, most of them were the cannon fodder of East Island. But those superiors hiding in the cannon fodder were still dazzling. He saw Tianyu, the high priest of ISE Grand Shrine. He saw Tide of the Glacier. He saw Ban of the Heroes Club. He saw King Bear of the Polar Ground Alliance. He also saw Shing of Knights Templars and Crow of Fantasy World. Before Zhongzhou State's retreat plan was officially implemented, all the forces of East Island had joined hands to attack in the shortest time. In the morning, the soldiers were at the gate of the city. It was solemn in the village. In addition to the solemnity in everyone's heart, there was only some panic that they didn't want to admit. Until a chaotic sound rang out. In the ruins at the entrance of the village, countless bricks and stones flew up in a loud noise. The wind and rain were fierce. Li Tianlan, who was dressed in white without a speck of dust, walked out of the ruins. He didn't gather with anyone from Zhongzhou State. He just walked up to the sky and walked forward alone. In the crowd, Dongxing Rushi silently watched the figure walking higher and higher in the sky, and her face was in a trance. One of her eyes became more and more blank and innocent, while the other clear and beautiful pupil was full of a complicated look and even a little intoxicated. In the farthest part of the crowd, in the void far away from East Island and Zhongzhou State, the air was slightly twisted. A slim white figure with a long sword on her back and a red dagger on her waist stared blankly at Li Tianlan, who was climbing up to the sky. In such a long distance, under the heavy rain, the young white figure in her sight was already blurred, but she clearly saw the familiar pride. That was the arrogant will that dared to despise heaven and earth. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Li Tianlan finally walked up to the sky, to the highest place. The silver human emperor stretched out in his hand and turned into the ultimate form of sky halberd. Two scarlet spear blades stretched out, elegant and complicated. Li Tianlan stood in the highest position, holding the human emperor and looking around. The crowd in his sight was still surging, as if it had filled the whole world. They were all enemies. Li Tianlan gently raised the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were cold. In the silence, he spoke first, and his tone was calm. My name is Li Tianlan. As he spoke, he stared directly at the most powerful expert of the invincible realm, Shinichi Miyamoto. Qin Weibai is my woman. 2 hours ago, she disappeared near the number 6 theater of operations. Li Tianlan paused and looked at Shinichi Miyamoto. Chapter 245. Invincible realm experts should be respected even if they were enemies. Shinichi Miyamoto was in the invincible realm. So at this moment, Li Tianlan's every move was extremely arrogant in everyone's eyes. The crowd was in an uproar. Whether inside or outside the village. Because of Li Tianlan's attitude and what he said. Qin Weibai was missing. Different from the rising stars in the dark world like Li Tianlan, Wang Xingxiao, and Gu Hanzhan, Qin Weibai, who didn't know martial arts, was definitely a big shot in the dark world. She was the second most powerful person in Samsara Palace. If something really happened to her in East Island, even if East Island won this war, it would have to face a very serious follow-up situation. The master of Samsara Palace could break a murderous weapon with one sword strike. If she took the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld to conquer East Island for Qin Weibai, it would definitely bring suffocating pressure to East Island. Everyone subconsciously looked at Shinichi Miyamoto's expression. Shinichi Miyamoto was expressionless. Only he could be sure that East Island didn't do Qin Weibai's disappearance. Besides East Island, there were only 5 dark superpowers. Which one was it? The first goal of the 5 superpowers when they entered Chengdao was definitely East Island. But this goal became impossible after the turmoil in Huading. They had no choice but to change their plans. Now the 5 superpowers joined hands with East Island, and each of them made a request. They wanted Fantasy World and Heroes Club of Liuhua Palace of Shinichi Miyamoto. They wanted Li Tianlan's Jiang family of South America. The Polar Ground Alliance, which didn't make a clear request but actually had the biggest plot. They wanted to build a real Knights Templar of the East Asian Diocese. None of them seemed suspicious, but they were all suspicious. Maybe Qin Weibai's disappearance was a plot made by the 5 superpowers again. If this thing was done well, it was very likely to be a fatal foreshadowing of the general trend. The more Shinichi Miyamoto thought about it, the more likely it seemed. What the 5 superpowers wanted most was the special warfare system of East Island. They joined hands to plan the border war outside of Zhongzhou State. Their purpose was to make Zhongzhou State unable to support Chengdao when it lost a lot of blood. To put it bluntly, they hoped that Zhongzhou State's action in East Island would fail. The Blood Battalion was the top priority of the Border Control Corps. It was impossible for Zhongzhou State to sit back and do nothing. They invited Arcis, who ranked 2nd on the divine list and lived in the headquarters of the Vatican, and asked him to go east with the murderous weapon Aria of Death. In this way, Zhongzhou State was bound to react. Wang Tianzong's trip to the border also proved this point. When Wang Tianzong took action, Huading was relatively empty. Zhongzhou State could only use the 3rd batch of manpower that was going to support Chengdao to guard Huading. And the strength of Zhongzhou State elites in Chengdao would be weakened after losing the 3rd batch of support. Everything was going according to their plan. But the only thing that deviated from the plan was the change in Huading. It was obviously out of the plan to let the 5 invincible realm experts get out of trouble. Because even if Wang Tianzong left Huading, Huading still had Gu Xingyun, the master of Samsara Palace, and the 3rd batch of elites who were supposed to enter Chengdao. This was the power that could suppress the 5 invincible realm experts. But the 5 superpowers didn't expect that the master of Samsara Palace didn't make a move at all. They planned the border war, but it didn't weaken the strength of Zhongzhou State much. Instead, it let countless elites trapped in Huading see the opportunity. So the chaos got more chaotic and completely out of their control. So that Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Tsangquan, the 2 grandmasters of the invincible realm, set foot on the road to return in advance. The 5 superpowers had no choice but to cooperate with East Island. They would attack Zhongzhou State together before the other 2 invincible realm experts of East Island returned, so that they could get some small rewards, they definitely wouldn't be reconciled to such a situation. Qin Weibai's disappearance might have something to do with this kind of unwillingness. If this was the foreshadowing of the 5 superpowers, then East Island would definitely be blamed for Qin Weibai's disappearance. When the master of Samsara Palace attacked East Island in extreme anger, the 5 superpowers would come back again. And at that time, Zhongzhou State, which had already failed, would lose the qualification to compete with them. Would the truth be like this? Shinichi Miyamoto thought silently, but the result was not optimistic. Because he knew very well that no matter what the truth was, the mysterious force that controlled Qin Weibai would realize it sooner or later when Zhongzhou State's failure was a foregone conclusion. Even if this wasn't their plan, as long as they had Qin Weibai as their bargaining chip, his speculation could become a reality at any time. East Island seemed to be destined to be turbulent this year. Shinichi Miyamoto raised his head. He suddenly felt a little lucky. Lucky that the Heroes Club and Fantasy World wanted a bargaining chip. They wanted Liohua Palace. Lucky that they wanted Liohua Palace. As his thoughts flashed in a mess, in Shinichi Miyamoto's sight, the young man standing above him took a step forward again. His tone was still calm, so calm that it made people's hearts palpitate. Who took my woman away? Shinichi Miyamoto finally spoke. His voice was calm and majestic, rumbling between heaven and earth. Rude. Invincible realm experts should be respected even if they were enemies. Li Tianlan still moved forward. His eyes became bright and dazzling because of absolute focus. He looked into Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes. They looked at each other. The heavy rain fell, and the strong wind blew his white clothes. His figure stood at the highest place, so lonely, but so dazzling. It was a very magnificent feeling. He stood there, and it was impossible to ignore him. This is not a war. Li Tianlan looked at Shinichi Miyamoto and suddenly spoke in a soft voice. Only a few people understood what he meant. There was no right or wrong in a war, only positions. The relationship between enemies, allies, and allies had always been delicate, and it changed in an instant. If it was not a war, then it was hatred. Hatred could naturally give up all respect and awe. Qin Weibai disappeared in East Island, so East Island was naturally the biggest suspect and the most promising force to find Qin Weibai. So although Li Tianlan didn't know who took Qin Weibai, the first person he asked was Shinichi Miyamoto, who had the highest position in the special warfare system of East Island. If East Island couldn't give him an explanation, no matter what the master of Samsara Palace would do in the future, at least Li Tianlan dared to take revenge on East Island at all costs. Because this was not a war. Shinichi Miyamoto twitched the corner of his mouth. He was a little scared, but more disdainful. Is this a threat? He asked. His gentle voice echoed between heaven and earth, and the realm of the invincible realm was completely revealed. You can think so. Li Tianlan's tone was calm, but his words were unreasonable. Shinichi Miyamoto nodded, and his voice echoed between heaven and earth. In my opinion, this is a war. You can think otherwise, but it doesn't matter. Today, you and everyone in Zhongzhou State will die. He finally moved his eyes away from Li Tianlan and looked at the village in the morning light. In the village, all the elites of Zhongzhou State gathered in the shortest time possible, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Shinichi Miyamoto raised the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were cruel and cold. Li Tianlan also moved his eyes away and looked at all the enemies present. Where is she? He asked softly. No one spoke. So Li Tianlan started to move forward. To him, he had been losing all his life and had never had anything. He had the Li family. But what was the Li family? It was glorious, but it was also illusory. He had it, but he never had it. Qin Weibai was different. She was his woman. She had appeared in his life in the most real, warm, and bright way. The most real. Was everything. He didn't mind the retreat of Zhongzhou State. But from the moment he received the call from military counselor, he had no way out. At least, he couldn't see a way out. He couldn't see it. He wouldn't see it. He slowly clenched the sky halberd in his hand and lifted it up little by little. It was raining heavily. The enemy was like a tide. The darkness on the horizon completely dissipated. Di Jiang's figure appeared in Shangguan. The morning was hazy, and it was also raining in the southeast of Shangguan. The heavy rain fell in the mountainous area in the southeast of Shangguan, shrouding the mountains. Standing on the top of the mountain and looking over, there was a blurred fog everywhere, distant and indifferent, without any smoke. Di Jiang stood on the top of a low mountain and looked for a while. He shook his head and muttered to himself, "What a good place. If I come again next time, I can come here to reminisce." He smiled and turned to walk down the hill. The mountainous area was undulating. Di Jiang walked for about 4 or 5 kilometers and finally saw a cave in the distance. The sky was completely bright. Di Jiang looked at his watch, put his hand in his mouth, and suddenly blew a sharp whistle. The ear-piercing whistle suddenly broke through the sky, bringing a series of harsh echoes in the whole mountainous area. As if responding to the whistle, the first figure appeared in the cave. Then the second one. More and more figures appeared. A squad, a squadron, a battalion. 100 people, 200 people, 300 people, a total of 300 figures walked out of the cave. Everyone walked steadily and looked calm. They walked out of the cave, walked up the hill, and stepped on the grass. The 300 people walked all the way. There was no rain between heaven and earth. All the rain completely disappeared where the 300 people passed. They walked quietly, as if they had completely defeated the will of heaven and earth. Di Jiang raised his eyebrows with a smile and inadvertently looked to the southeast. Shangguan was connected to Changdao. The southeast of Shangguan was the southwest of Changdao. And the southwest of Changdao was the battlefield. "Be ready to go at any time," Di Jiang said in a flat tone. "Yes." In the team of 300 people, a middle-aged man standing in the front responded in a deep voice. He clenched his fists subconsciously, and a dazzling blue light flashed. The hot breath filled the whole hill in the heavy rain. The heavy rain was receding. Di Jiang looked up at the sky with a smile, but his eyes were extremely cold. Heaven and earth? What was heaven and earth? What he was leading now was the only organized super force of the Wang family of Beihai. Code name, Heaven Punishment. This is not a war. When this peaceful voice rang in the living room through the screen, Qin Weibai was eating breakfast. The place where she was put under house arrest was very shabby, but the breakfast was very sumptuous. As a captive with great value, and even one of the future hostesses of the Jiang family of South America, Qin Weibai got enough preferential treatment. Wasn't Evil's playful, second sister-in-law, another kind of politeness? Even Moonlight, the superior of the half-step invincible realm of the Jiang family of South America, didn't dare to slight Qin Weibai in action, although there was hostility in her eyes. Qin Weibai was watching TV. The picture on the TV was the encirclement of Zhongzhou State. It seemed to know what Qin Weibai was paying attention to, so most of the time the picture was fixed on Li Tianlan. He ended the short conversation with Shinichi Miyamoto and looked at the crowd. "Where is she?" On the TV, Li Tianlan asked slowly. Qin Weibai sat quietly on the old sofa, and the corners of her eyes and eyebrows seemed to become gentle at this moment. "I'm here." Looking at the TV, Qin Weibai said softly. "He can't hear me." Evil sat on the other side of the sofa, squinting at the TV. "Is second sister-in-law worried?" Qin Weibai glanced at Evil, arrogant and indifferent. "Since second sister-in-law's little lover is so worried about her, I don't mind helping him." Evil looked at Qin Weibai and said with a smile, "I just talked to second brother on the phone. He was very surprised to know that you are here as a guest. He asked me to end things here immediately and bring you and Li Tianlan back to East Island. So, if there are no accidents, you will see him soon. Actually, it doesn't have to be like this." Evil chuckled and said, if second sister-in-law didn't transfer the luck of the Jiang family gathered in Zhongzhou State to Li Tianlan in some way, we wouldn't care about his life or death. Speaking of this, you asked for it. You sound very confident. Then why don't you go and catch him? Qin Weibai asked in a flat tone. Evil seemed to be stumped by the question. He thought about it carefully for a while, then shook his head and said, I don't know why. He's obviously a nonentity, but he gives me a dangerous feeling. Although I'm a killer, I don't want to take too many risks. It's the same now. But now, you're in my hands. With such an important bargaining chip, everything will be easy. Second sister-in-law, you'd better hurry up and finish eating. Then I'll take you to the battlefield. With you there, what can Li Tianlan do? We can go now. Qin Weibai wiped the corner of her mouth with a tissue and said softly. Evil was stunned. He looked at Qin Weibai and said seriously, you don't seem to be worried? He will die. Even if he can survive, in our hands, his life will be worse than death. In your hands? Qin Weibai sneered, you don't deserve it. She turned her head and looked at the TV. On the TV, a man in white was moving high in the sky. The white clothes were very white, like snow without any impurities. Qin Weibai looked at it quietly. Through the TV, she felt the madness. The madness at all costs. Her eyes began to blur, as if she had returned to the snowy night in Kunlun Mountain in her dream. The same white clothes. The heavy snow. The same waves of enemies. In the dream, the pictures flashed quickly and clearly. The white clothes, the sword, the smile, the helpless and self-deprecating face, the pride that despised the world, and the eternal loneliness. There was blood and snow in the dream. Red and white. It turned out that after the extreme glory became lonely at the end of fate, the feeling was not bleak and sad, but only despair. The most painful despair was pure despair. Qin Weibai's face was pale, but her eyes quickly became clear and cold. Let's go. She stood up and walked to the door. Evil narrowed his eyes behind her and suddenly chuckled. The first beauty of Zhongzhou State can't wait to join our Jiang family of South America? I'm really flattered. The first beauty of Zhongzhou State? Qin Weibai suddenly turned around and looked at Evil. Are you talking about me? What else? Evil shrugged. I don't like this title. Qin Weibai shook her head slowly and firmly and said, and I'm not the first beauty of Zhongzhou State. If you're not, then who is? Evil's eyes were playful. If there is a woman more beautiful than second sister-in-law, I really want to see it. Does such a woman really exist? Who is she? Yes. Qin Weibai nodded indifferently. She turned around and walked out of the door, saying calmly, Phoenix Pavilion, Gu Xianyan, code name Red. Chapter 246. The moment the last trace of darkness was dispelled, Shinichi Miyamoto raised his palm. There was no hesitation or pause, just a plain, simple, not high-pitched command that echoed in the sky. Attack. There was no need to hesitate to attack. For Shinichi Miyamoto, no matter if there was a follow-up after the Battle of Changdao, Zhongzhou State would not be a friend. So, attack and knock them out first. The figures all over the mountains and plains moved with a loud bang. But Li Tianlan was the first to move. In the heavy rain, the white shadow was full of incomparable decisive momentum. He was getting faster and faster, and his momentum was getting more and more violent. A man's charge. In the rain curtain where the darkness receded and the light came, a blazing torrent suddenly lit up in the sky. Wisps of lightning flashed in the fiery red torrent, spreading from the sky to the ground, shining the brightest light in the dark afterglow. With the silver sky halberd in hand, Li Tianlan rushed into the enemy group in an instant along with the violent torrent. The rain kept falling from the sky. The torrent in the sky was boiling. The torrent of hundreds of meters was mighty and hot, covering the enemy group in a very short time, like a Milky Way falling from the sky. Kill. Boundless flames were ignited in the overwhelming rain. In the dazzling light, Li Tianlan waved the sky halberd in his hand crazily. The raging fire whistled in the enemy group with the halberd, and the murderous intent was monstrous. The silent battlefield, the messy rainstorm, and the raging fire. A man's charge, and countless people's retreat. At this moment, no one would be able to forget this scene, because in this almost deathly silent battlefield, only the place where the white figure was so vivid and bloody. It was a kind of momentum that could overwhelm thousands of soldiers and horses, arrogant and strong. Silver radiance blossomed unscrupulously in the blazing fire. Blood splashed up like waves in the fire. Trees collapsed one after another, and a large number of corpses were thrown into the sky. The crowd was in a state of panic and instinctively retreated. The white figure who was tightly surrounded was brimming with a hearty killing intent. The silver radiance that constantly shot up into the sky clearly conveyed a clear will to all the enemies. All of you. Non-entities. Kill him. Almost at the same time, Shinichi Miyamoto and the people in charge of the 5 superpowers stood in different positions and spoke in unison. Everyone's expression was gloomy and angry. Thousands of soldiers and horses were at the gate of the city, but a young man from Zhongzhou State was charging alone. For everyone, this was a disgrace. Shinichi Miyamoto even took a step forward, intending to do it himself. I'll go. A voice sounded behind Shinichi Miyamoto, and a pure white figure also rushed toward Li of a white shadow. Shinichi Miyamoto narrowed his eyes and said no more. Of Shinichi Miyamoto. He narrowed his eyes and said no more. In another position, of the Jiang family, Li of family, was also Miyamoto. Before joining the Jiang family of South America, Rose was the top agent of the highest level in Star State. She was best at sneak attacks and assassinations. Qin Weibai had fallen into the hands of the Jiang family of South America. Their only goal now was Li Tianlan. Apart from that, they had no other requests. For Rose, the sooner she brought Li Tianlan back, the better. The 2 top imperial guards, Glacier and Tide, were also moving, not toward Li Tianlan, but toward the village in front of them. The 2 of them walked in front of Shinichi Miyamoto and looked at the crowd in the village, which was clearly visible in the morning light. Zhongzhou State, do you dare to fight? Binghe said expressionlessly. He didn't mention names, and there was no need to. On this battlefield, every one of them was from Zhongzhou State. Do you dare to fight? Fight! A clear and melodious voice suddenly pierced through the clouds, and the person had yet to arrive. However, the sound continued to rumble high up in the sky. Wherever the voice passed, killing intent instantly filled the air. For everyone in Zhongzhou State, this voice was very familiar. This was the voice of Gongsun Qi, General of 9 Heavens of Zhongzhou State. His words were flat and cold, simple and simple. Kill them. There were no orders to retreat or break out of the encirclement. Instead, he killed them. The white figure who claimed to be a young prodigy was charging forward alone. One person was charging at the front. They were a country, so how could they retreat? How could he dare to retreat? Kill. In the village where the elites of Zhongzhou State gathered, there was a sudden burst of uniform roars. In the pouring rain, teams of elites rushed forward. With the village as the center, the entire battlefield instantly turned into an incomparably cruel meat grinder. Blood splattered and corpses flew everywhere. Flickering lights and shadows constantly spread and interweaved on the front line, flickering between light and dark, connecting into a line and combining into one. Zhongzhou State was behind. Li Tianlan was in front. Among the countless enemies, the silver sword intent broke out endlessly like a raging wave. The silver light drove the raging flame and drew natural arcs on the battlefield one after another. Blood kept splashing into the air. Li Tianlan, who was desperate, was overdrawing his body at all costs. His absolute willpower kept him in the most sober and indifferent state of killing. The cannon fodder, who were forced to the forefront by Shinichi Miyamoto, could only passively consume his strength. Advance. Advance in a straight line. The sky halberd had completely become a murderous weapon that reaped lives. On such a large-scale battlefield, when weapons of mass destruction were greatly limited, the effect of the 2-meter-long sky halberd was far better than any gun or sword. The halberd swept through the crowd, bringing with it a large amount of blood. The thick blood spilled on the ground along with the rain, and the land that gradually turned red was covered by light and shadows. Ice walls rose and broke around Li Tianlan one after another. Dense bullets shot from all directions, but they were constantly blocked by the ice walls. Li Tianlan's figure inside the ice walls was sometimes clear and sometimes blurred. Only his white clothes were still as white as snow, without any trace of blood. The enemies around him howled in despair and retreated. There were fewer and fewer people in front of Li Tianlan. Finally, there was only a man in white. Li Tianlan's expression grew calmer and even a little soft. Bai Yi, the right advisor of Wuji Palace, also in white, stood in front of Li Tianlan with a smile on his face, but his eyes were extremely cruel and indifferent. That's the end. He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said. Li Tianlan didn't stop walking toward Bai Yi. The distance between the two of them was getting closer and closer, but the East Island cannon fodder around them were desperately moving away. Where is she? Li Tianlan looked at Bai Yi and asked. I don't know. Bai Yi's tone was cold. Oh, Li Tianlan said, nodding and saying, then go to hell. He raised the long halberd. The silver flowing light was like a phantom. The moment Bai Yi's eyes flickered, the sky halberd had already chopped down in the air with sharp and heavy sword intent. Clang! A lot of sparks burst out at the moment when the weapons collided. Bai Yi subconsciously pulled out his saber and raised his arm. The saber blade was facing up and directly blocked Li Tianlan's chop. The majestic power fell from the sky. Bai Yi's body trembled violently, and his whole body suddenly became shorter. One strike. With just one strike, Bai Yi's feet directly sank into the ground. Li Tianlan's figure took 2 steps back in the air and tilted his head. I'm in a hurry. He said, compared with Yue Kong, you're still not good enough. Really? Bai Yi, whose feet and even his calves had sunk into the ground, sneered. His eyes were gloomy and weird. Yue Kong really died in your hands. You'll end up like him. Li Tianlan said calmly, I'll kill you now. The sky halberd pointed down. Li Tianlan stood in the air, shook his arm, and stabbed down in an instant. At this moment, the silver human emperor and Li Tianlan seemed to have completely become one. The surging sword intent was replaced by the crazy killing intent. This wasn't any unique skill. It was power. Pure power. It was an indescribable momentum. Every move and every moment was filled with indomitable aggressiveness and determination. Bai Yi suddenly burst into laughter. He looked up at the silver light in the sky and jumped up from the ground. He swung the long saber into the air from below. A dark blue semicircular saber radiance suddenly appeared in the rain curtain. The saber radiance spread to the sky dozens of meters high, entangled with the raging fire under the silver light, and surged wildly. In the dazzling light and shadow, a man and a woman quietly passed through the fleeing East Island cannon fodder dozens of meters away. The rain curtain fell, and the light spread. The man and the woman who were moving toward the same place in different directions continued to move forward, but their figures gradually disappeared, and finally hid in the void. At such a delicate moment, the man and the woman who were not far away from each other seemed to notice each other's existence at the same time. They looked at each other, and their eyes were both cold. The man recognized the woman. That was Rose of the Jiang family of South America. Rose also recognized the man. Red Flame, the Grand Knight of Knights Templars. There was no doubt that this was a hunt. And the prey was Li Tianlan. This could be said to be a tacit understanding, but in essence, it was a competition. The battle continued. In the rain curtain, when the crisis broke out, who would win? Chapter 247. The saber light went from the bottom to the top. In the heavy rain, as the blade cut through the air, Baye's whole body was completely covered by the surging lightning. The long saber was less than 1 meter long, but it seemed to be extended countless times by the lightning as it swam in the air. The blade rose in the heavy rain, and a natural semicircular arc of light suddenly appeared between heaven and earth. The faint blue arc of light filled the battlefield and went all the way up. The sharp killing intent and saber energy spread wildly. The saber light went up against the sky. The sea of fire fell from the sky. The white shadow and the silver light in the air had completely merged. Li Tianlan held the halberd and stabbed straight. As the sky halberd moved, the endless flame burning in the void instantly surged. It was mighty. The man and the halberd and the fire and the man. It went forward with indomitable will. The raging fire and the lightning blended in an instant. At this moment, all the power in Li Tianlan's body gathered together, and there was no way out. There was only a pair of eyes left in Baye's sight. It was a pair of eyes as deep as the sea. The calm sea, the crazy waves. Boom! The lightning and the fire intertwined, and the sound of weapons colliding was like a roar. In the bright light and shadow, what went down was still going down. And what went up was also going down. The long saber in Baye's hand, which was also famous in East Island, suddenly bent into a shocking arc. The weapons collided, the light and shadow collided, and the sound of the long saber breaking turned into a roar at the same time. A broken saber flew into the sky with the jumping lightning and fire. Baye's figure was shrouded in flames, and he raised the broken saber above his head. The silver sky halberd stabbed the saber, and the power broke out endlessly. Li Tianlan fell from the sky, pushing Baye's figure to keep sinking. In the confrontation between the thunder-shocking realm and the fire-flaming realm, the lightning had completely disappeared, and the fire had mostly dissipated, but the remaining light was burning more and more. The two fell from the sky, and the fire scattered everywhere. From a distance, they looked like burning falling stars. The stars crashed into the ground with an incomparably brutal momentum. The fire scattered everywhere. The raging flames had completely turned into magma, surging to the extreme with Li Tianlan as the center. When the human emperor pierced into the ground, the whole battlefield was shaking. Large tracts of land and turf flew into the sky in the heavy rain and the flying magma. Deep cracks spread unscrupulously on the ground. A big hole with a radius of nearly 20 meters appeared at the place where the two of them landed without warning. All the land nearby collapsed. For a moment, the soil, grass, trees, and dust on the ground all burst out. Baye's figure disappeared. Just as he was about to hit the ground, his figure immediately became faint. The air was filled with the sound of saber lights slicing through the air. Unique technique, dark ambush. The human emperor in Li Tianlan's hand stabbed into the ground. In the earth-shaking scene, a broken saber suddenly appeared behind Li Tianlan. Baye's expression was twisted. He raised the dagger with both hands and slashed at Li Tianlan's back. Before the bright light of the blade appeared, the broken saber filled with blue lightning had already appeared behind Li Tianlan. Fast, fierce, and secretive. This was the most powerful saber unique skill in the entire East Island. Under the saber light, the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. Swish! The blade slashed through, but it only smashed a black shadow. In a split second, Li Tianlan directly switched places with the shadow. He just moved sideways by one step and dodged the saber light. The human emperor suddenly swept horizontally and directly hit the blade of the retracted broken saber. The blade of the halberd swept past Baye along the blade with a series of sparks. Under the heavy sword intent, Li Tianlan took a step forward and slashed fiercely with the human emperor. Baye roared fiercely. He almost exerted the power of the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked to the extreme. The broken saber concentrated all its power and slashed crazily on the human emperor again and again. The fire and lightning became hot and bright and then dimmed and dissipated. The cycle repeated. Only the sword intent and the saber light were fighting and fighting against each other. He stepped forward. He moved forward. Li Tianlan's movements were extremely simple and extremely fast. In the chaotic air where the fire and lightning intertwined, countless shadows had already appeared around him before the heavy rain fell. The shadows froze his every subtle movement, looking clear and dazzling. Bai Yi was in a trance for a moment, and Li Tianlan had already stabbed in front of him with the silver blade. Bai Yi retreated quickly. Li Tianlan, who had the upper hand from the beginning, was even more aggressive. The moment Bai Yi retreated, Li Tianlan became completely violent in an instant. The fierce sword intent suddenly filled the sky and the earth. Li Tianlan's whole body was full of sword intent. The majestic sword intent roared wildly with the sky halberd. Like a deep sea with a raging tide, it pressed toward Bai Yi overwhelmingly. Li Tianlan stood in the center of the sword intent, resolute and seemingly flawless. Bai Yi retreated again and again. But Li Tianlan's killing intent soared almost out of control. The human emperor was blocked. Before Bai Yi could withdraw his saber, the silver halberd, which looked as heavy as a mountain, smashed down again with a fierce wind. It stabbed straight, chopped vertically, and swept horizontally. Li Tianlan's movements were not fancy, but the seemingly simple attacks gave people an irresistible feeling in the extremely smooth attacks. Firm and fierce. Incomparably firm and fierce. Bai Yi retreated faster and faster. He had wanted to take down Li Tianlan with all his strength, but now he was running away with all his strength. The battle became a suppression, a one-sided suppression. The silver human emperor almost recklessly ravaged the enemies in front of it. Bai Yi's figure rushed up to the sky. The faint blue light only shone for a second, and then he was directly smashed to the ground by Li Tianlan. One advancing and the other retreating, the two rushed into the nearby crowd of cannon fodder used to consume the physical strength of the elites of Zhongzhou state. Wherever Li Tianlan passed, the sword intent was endless. The sky halberd swung and swung in the crowd. In the blood rain all over the sky, there was an absurd feeling that there was no one there. The long saber in Bai Yi's hand was densely covered with cracks. Blood dripped from his perlicue to the raindrops. In front of him, Li Tianlan's white figure became clearer and clearer. He was moving forward. He was attacking. He was killing. Without any pause, the sky halberd waved, and all the enemies turned into flying flesh and blood. The blood seemed to stimulate Li Tianlan's heart. His eyes were blood red, and his killing intent was boiling. In a very short time, his killing intent seemed to have really reached the peak. Bai Yi's eyes flickered, and he suddenly clenched the long saber in his hand. Fight! The sky halberd smashed down. The heavy rain couldn't cover the sound of metal colliding. The long saber in Bai Yi's hand suddenly burst into pieces, and countless fragments exploded in the crowd with dazzling electric fire. Li Tianlan's arms shook, and the joints all over his body suddenly burst into a crisp sound. The sword intent all over the sky was condensed by him in front of the sky halberd. Straight thrust. This blow pierced through the wind and rain, as if it could break all the obstacles in the world. Bai Yi's blood-covered right hand was still raised forward. But the moment the long saber was broken, his left hand reached to his waist. The long spear came straight at him. Bai Yi's left hand suddenly moved. An exquisite soft sword appeared in his hand. The sword trembled and suddenly straightened. The wind suddenly rose. The two cannon fodder from East Island who were closest to Bai Yi staggered and fell to the ground in the sudden gust of wind. The heavy rain was blown aside by the gale. A fierce and violent sword intent suddenly lit up in the wind. The gale gathered into a wall in the sword intent. The unique skill of Jifeng sword raining school, wall of strong wind. The sword intent flashed in the wind. A nearly 10-meter-high wind wall appeared in front of Bai Yi. He was the right advisor of Wuji Palace, Bai Yi. In terms of realm, his realm was not as good as Yuekong, the first guardian of Wuji Palace. But because of the long time, few people knew that Bai Yi, who was infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm, used to be the junior brother of Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace. He was also from Jifeng Sword Raining School. So he not only had the unique skill of Wuji Palace, but also the unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School. Even because of his family background, he spent much more time studying swordsmanship than using sabers. Bai Yi was best at using the sword with his left hand. This was a fact that he almost forgot himself, or his trump card. He never thought that in today's environment, the sword technique that he hadn't used for many years would become the killer move against Li Tianlan. The gale roared and gathered. In his sight, Li Tianlan's white clothes fluttered violently with the wind. The silver halberd moved forward steadily and stabbed into the wind wall silently. The wind wall was completely broken in the turbulence. Several tornadoes were blown and scattered on the battlefield. Human Emperor was still moving forward. Bai Yi drew his sword. It was also a straight stab. The bright sword edge hit the tip of Human Emperor's spear. The soft sword bent slightly. With the help of the slight elasticity, Bai Ye's body flew to the surrounding crowd in an instant. The cannon fodder ran in panic on the battlefield. With the help of the small wind, Bai Ye's body seemed to be weightless, shuttling through the crowd without a pause. His figure was like lightning. The unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School, chasing wind and chasing moon. Li Tianlan's eyes focused. He had fought against the masters of Jifeng Sword Raining School. In the battle where he was ambushed by Jifeng Sword Raining School a few days ago, Wind Ghost, whom he killed, was one of the high-end combat forces of Jifeng Sword Raining School. The two stabs by Bai Yi just now looked ordinary, but Li Tianlan knew very well that it was the unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School, Wild Wind Cut. Bai Ye's strength was even stronger than that of Wind Ghost. After two wild wind cuts, the abundant sword intent was enough to condense a real wild wind. That was the real killer move. If he couldn't dodge it, he would face one of the most powerful sword moves in the dark world. Jifeng Sword Raining School. This move was known as the fiercest and most violent sword intent in the dark world. But Li Tianlan, who had experienced this move, knew very well that although this move pursued sword intent, it didn't pursue one's destruction. Instead, it created something similar to a sword domain while causing the greatest damage. Li Tianlan wanted to dodge the next wild wind, but Bai Yi kept moving in the crowd, appearing and disappearing from time to time. Li Tianlan couldn't lock on his position for a while. The killing intent flashed in Li Tianlan's eyes. The Human Emperor instantly shrank. The silver light split in his hands, and the sky halberd suddenly turned into two swords. The eighth blade, Burning Sky. In such a chaotic battlefield, this move could be said to be blessed by nature. The sharp and hot flames suddenly swirled in the battlefield. The sword light was like a dragon. Li Tianlan's body spun and flashed, rushing directly into the crowd. He was completely harvesting lives. The cannon fodder around him fell down one by one, and the distance between them shortened in the blink of an eye. Bai Yi shuttled through the crowd faster and faster. The soft sword in his hand was straight. Above the sword edge, the air was twisted in a shape visible to the naked eye. That was the wind that had accumulated power to the limit. As long as the wind hit Li Tianlan, Bai Yi was absolutely confident that he could kill Li Tianlan with a move of Jifeng sword. The sword light kept spinning. Bai Yi looked calm, watching the fiery red sword light getting closer and closer. 50 meters. 20 meters. 10 meters. The distance between life and death. Bai Ye's eyes suddenly contracted, and he was about to make a move. A dazzling light suddenly burst out in front of Li Tianlan. The air twisted quickly in front of him, and the transparent color was refracted into colorful light. The light was dense and messy, and finally turned into a dazzling white. A low and majestic voice rang in his ears. It was English. Li Tianlan didn't understand the meaning, but many people present did. It was a simple word. Redemption. It was the unique skill of Knights Templars, or the Vatican. Red Flame, one of the 8 Knights of Knights Templars, appeared above Li Tianlan in the air, expressionless. It was not Knights Templars' business to bring Li Tianlan back to Europe, but it was the will of His Majesty the Pope. Most of the experts in Knights Templars were true fanatics. Since Li Tianlan was related to the Pope's prophecy, Red Flame had to bring him back at all costs. But he also knew very well that with his current strength, he was not even a match for Li Tianlan. What's more, there was Rose from the Jiang family of South America nearby. If he wanted to take Li Tianlan away, he could only rely on Bai Yi for the time being. The light of redemption covered Li Tianlan's eyes. In an instant, there was a vast expanse in front of Li Tianlan. Bai Yi, who was looking for an opportunity, was ecstatic. The gale flowed on the blade, and Bai Yi rushed to the front. 5 meters. This was a distance that could almost determine everything. Bai Yi drew his sword. The fierce wind completely gushed out of the blade. Red Flame looked at it indifferently. In his perception, Rose, who had been hiding in the distance, rushed over quickly and appeared nearby. It seemed that she wanted to make a move. Red Flame narrowed his eyes and watched the battlefield, ready to make a move at any time. The fierce wind rose to the sky, sweeping the dazzling white light brought by redemption. Bai Yi raised his sword to gather strength. In the white light, at the moment when the gale was about to fall on Li Tianlan's figure suddenly became illusory. Disappeared. The smile on Bai Yi's face suddenly froze. 2 illusory and ethereal shadows suddenly appeared in front of him. The wind roared. The 2 shadows did not stop at all. They rushed forward against the wind in a nearly charging posture. Before Bai Yi could react, the shadows rushed into Bai Yi's body in an instant and then went out from behind him. The shadows dimmed for a moment and completely dissipated. But the silver edge in Li Tianlan's hands suddenly became clear. It was still a straight stab. Under the shadow of death, Bai Yi subconsciously wanted to avoid it. But as soon as he moved, he felt a sharp pain in his body. The pain swept through his whole body. Shadow formula. What was a shadow? Tribulation's shadow was killing intent, while Li Tianlan's shadow was sword intent. The shadow condensed by sword intent entered his body and broke out completely. It was enough to destroy everything in Bai Yi's body in the shortest time. Puff. Bai Yi's body moved. The human emperor in Li Tianlan's hand had already rushed over, and the broad blade of the halberd directly sank into his body. Li Tianlan's face was pale, but his eyes were cold and bright. Bai Yi's figure froze in place and stared at Li Tianlan. He opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, the sword intent in his body had broken out in an instant. With a muffled sound, Bai Yi's body exploded into a mist of blood with a boom. Li Tianlan's figure flashed. Red Flame in the air finally reacted. He suddenly took a step forward, subconsciously trying to stop Li Tianlan from escaping. But Li Tianlan's figure flashed, and his whole body had appeared in front of Red Flame. He was so close, so close. Red Flame was at a loss for a moment. At this moment, he could clearly feel Li Tianlan's weakness. After the shadow formula broke out, even Tribulation himself needed time to breathe to recover. But Li Tianlan rushed directly to his side at this time. A somewhat familiar object slipped out of Li Tianlan's wide sleeves. Li Tianlan reached out and held it. Red Flame, who was at a loss, suddenly narrowed his eyes, and his hair stood on end. He knew this thing. It was a gun, a pistol. Ordinary pistols could not hurt a master like Red Flame, but the one in Li Tianlan's hand was a famous gun in the whole dark world. However, although this gun was famous, it was often suppressed by another gun, so this gun had been ignored by many people intentionally or unintentionally. The gun that suppressed this gun was called Whisper. And the pistol in Li Tianlan's hand was called Grim Smile. The pistol that fell into Li Tianlan's hand when he chased after Heavenly Calamity in Zhongjing. The muzzle of Grim Smile was pressed against Red Flame's chest. Without a word of nonsense, Li Tianlan pulled the trigger in silence. There was a thunderclap in the fierce battlefield. Countless powerful special bullets burst out of the barrel almost at the same time. Blood burst out. A waterfall-like barrage of bullets suddenly rushed out behind Red Flame. Grim's smile opened fire with all its strength. In less than half a second all the bullets had been shot out. Red Flame. He was one of the 8 Knights of Knights Templars, a master at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Before he could say a word, his huge body fell directly to the ground. Li Tianlan didn't even look at him. He took a deep breath and suddenly clenched Human Emperor. His joints shook again. It seemed that because he used too much force, even his bones made a clear cracking sound. In the next second, Li Tianlan's figure disappeared. The silver edge, with a natural arc, appeared directly above the head of Rose, who was rushing forward. The Human Emperor chopped down with a cold and murderous arc. There was no raging fire, but under the endless killing intent, the arc of light seemed to be huge and desperate. Everything happened too fast. Rose couldn't even stop her rushing forward. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in front of her. He could clearly feel the bones in his body cracking piece by piece as he slaughtered his way to the point of self-destruction. But at this moment, Li Tianlan was also extremely powerful. Regardless of everything. At this moment, no master at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm could withstand his blow. Blood flowed down naturally along the white clothes. Li Tianlan's clothes were as white as snow. He was in the air, but he had a kind of almost invincible majesty. Rose's face, which was not beautiful but gentle and graceful like a landscape painting, was full of dullness. At this moment, she could be completely sure that she couldn't resist this blow. Under such a strong attack, she didn't even have room to struggle. Under the silver edge, she was a nonentity. Her will could not be said to be weak, but everything turned around too fast. Just a second ago, she was still thinking about how to fight with Red Flame for the seriously injured and dying Li Tianlan. But the next second, Li Tianlan's attack, which was enough to destroy her, was already in front of her. Such a sharp turn directly made her heart completely collapse, and the fear of death emerged like never before. She closed her eyes in despair and screamed subconsciously, "I know where Boss Qin is." Buzz. Blood flew out. Li Tianlan suddenly stopped the Human Emperor in his hand. Chapter 248. Cold, indifferent, without sorrow or joy. Under the silver edge, Li Tianlan was full of despair. Rose looked at Li Tianlan, who stood in front of her with a halberd, in horror. Blood flowed down her face. Rose's face, which was not beautiful but gentle and comfortable, seemed to have countless worms wriggling slowly on her face, which was indescribably ferocious. The whole world seemed to be silent. Until Li Tianlan's voice sounded. "Say it." Awe-inspiring, mighty, like a god. In this state, Li Tianlan was terrifying to the extreme. He was calm and crazy, hot and cold, and his every move had a killing momentum that could destroy everything. Blood dripped on the ground. Rose stroked her face. After a little buffer time, she seemed to regain her calmness. "You ruined my face?" Rose stared at Li Tianlan in front of her, and her eyes suddenly showed deep hatred. "How dare you ruin my face? It's ugly." "So be it." Li Tianlan's tone was cold. "Where is she?" "I'll kill you." Rose seemed to be completely crazy in an instant. She opened her hands and rushed directly to Li Tianlan. An expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm fought desperately. Even if she was disorganized, her power could not be underestimated. Dense blue lightning burst out at the moment when Rose opened her hands. The lightning wrapped Rose's whole body, and the air twisted violently in front of her. An air vortex with a diameter of 100 meters suddenly formed, vast and cold. The whole vortex was completely filled with blue lightning in the blink of an eye. At the center of the vortex, Rose's body was like a big cocoon wrapped in lightning. Her sudden high-pitched scream was still spreading in the battlefield, but her whole body smashed directly toward Li Tianlan like a cannonball. She was determined, angry, desperate, and irrational. She was going to kill the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State in front of her. Even at the cost of her life. No one knew what this face meant to Rose. She was Jiang Qinyan's woman, or rather, Jiang Qinyan's pet. She was even more favored by the second master than the beautiful Moonlight, a superior of the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Qinyan liked to go crazy with her in the daytime or at night with the lights on. Her face was really not beautiful, but it was another extreme of gentleness and grace, which made men more infatuated. Jiang Qinyan liked to see her ecstatic expression when she climbed to the peak little by little, saying that it was as beautiful as a painting. But now, this painting had been destroyed. Rose couldn't imagine what would happen to her when she returned to the Jiang family of South America, and she didn't dare to think about it. The moment she felt the pain on her face, she went completely crazy. The huge gap made her instinctively want to kill the man who ruined her face at all costs. Even if I die, I must kill him. The huge vortex, which had been completely dyed by the blue electric light, was spinning wildly. Rose's whole body was like a streamer shooting out of the vortex, magnificent and gorgeous. It was a desperate attack that killed both the enemy and himself. There was no turning back now. This was the most brilliant moment in Rose's life, brilliant and decisive. But would the figure, which had been completely shrouded by the electric light, regret before he died? Li Tianlan stood on the ground and raised the sky halberd in his hand. The silver halberd pointed to the sky. The attack that had been stopped by force gathered power again, and the whole human emperor suddenly turned into a slightly trembling silver light. One was moving, and the other was still. The blue streamer rushed down without reservation. In an instant, a blue halo suddenly burst out of the place where Li Tianlan and Rose stood. The dazzling electric light flowed around, and the halo quickly expanded into a circle with a diameter of nearly 100 meters. All the turf, trees, and even the nearby cannon fodder were completely swallowed up at the first time and became nothingness in the swimming electric light. A large area of the ground sank, but in the blurred light and shadow, the white figure still stood, strong and proud. The light dissipated. The area around the two people fighting was already scorched. Li Tianlan stood where he was, holding the human emperor in his hand. The human emperor had become the most penetrating form of a spear. Rose's body hung on the tip of the spear, dripping with blood. Rose was still smiling, and her face was covered with blood. Her smile was ferocious and horrible, but her eyes were full of desolation and loneliness. Li Tianlan quietly stared into her eyes and said thoughtfully, "The Jiang family of South America?" Li Tianlan knew something about the 5 dark forces that entered Chengdao, but it was limited to their names. Ahem, Rose coughed softly. The silver spear that pierced her body didn't kill her immediately. She grabbed the human emperor with the last strength in her hands and said in a sad tone, "It's too late." "Huh, it's too late. So what if you know? An invincible realm expert guards Qin Weibai in person, and your woman will soon become the second madam of the Jiang family of South America. If I die, Jiang Qinyan will have a new toy." Her gentle and quiet eyes were vicious and cold. She looked at Li Tianlan and said word by word, "When the second master swallows the Samsara palace and gets tired of your woman, Qin Weibai will have many men." Bang. Li Tianlan didn't wait for her to finish. His arms shook suddenly, and the violent power shattered Rose's body in an instant. Blood spilled all over the sky. The Jiang family of South America. He stood where he was and said to himself again. Thick blood gushed out from the corner of his mouth. Li Tianlan closed his mouth tightly, so the blood began to flow from his nostrils and eyes, and then it was washed away by the heavy rain. He took a step forward, facing directly in the direction of the Jiang family of South America. The wind blew, and the lightning flashed. When the cannon fodder of East Island was consumed in large numbers, the thunder-shocking realm experts of East Island and the 5 forces finally entered the battlefield. Li Tianlan undoubtedly became the most conspicuous target. As soon as he took a step forward, several figures with strong killing intent rushed directly in front of him. Without any pause, several people attacked with all their strength. For Li Tianlan, this was not a war. But for everyone except him, it was a war right now. A fight to the death. The elites of Zhongzhou state roared and rushed out of the village at full speed. At this point, no one held back anymore. East Island united the five forces. In the case that the other side had an advantage in both cannon fodder and high-end combat capability, everyone here was an enemy. No one held back anymore. Everyone rushed out. Fighting for life and death. Fighting for Zhongzhou state. In front of them, the white figure that originally belonged to their camp was still charging alone. Behind him, a country went crazy. Hot blood was surging, and finally turned into a power that could burn everything. Blood rained on the battlefield. The sound of gunfire, rain, and sword light spread to every corner. In the front of the Zhongzhou state crowd, a figure that was as strong as a giant roared and rushed in Li Tianlan's direction. A large flame surged wildly around him, and the fiery red color had almost completely turned into a deep blue. That was Su Chu. Du Hanyin, who had just joined Sai City, moved more and more gracefully. She flew around Su Chu, and the blue and red flames intertwined, sweeping everything in her way. The Eastern Theater of Operations was charging. Mount Shu was charging. Sai City was charging. Whether in terms of the number of people or high-end strength, if the three forces combined, they would play an important role in the camp of Zhongzhou state. As soon as the three forces rushed out of the village, they seemed to have a tacit understanding, or as if they had already informed each other. The three forces rushed in Li Tianlan's direction at the same time. So the entire army of Zhongzhou state was led to charge in Li Tianlan's direction. The sound of killing shook the sky. Li Tianlan was still outside the camp of Zhongzhou state, but at this time, he seemed to have become the center of the camp of Zhongzhou state. Without dispersing their forces, both the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun city were taking advantage of the situation. The rainstorm roared. The battlefield was extremely chaotic in an instant. In the chaos that no one cared too much about, some people in the elite camp of Zhongzhou state, who were all moving forward, began to retreat quietly. Retreat. To the left. To the right. The phalanx was originally very neat, but one by one, people kept leaving the battlefield sparsely. In the melee of thousands of people, this scene was so small that it was almost unnoticeable. This was the phalanx of the Eastern Theater of Operations of Zhongzhou state. At this time, the hundreds of fire-flaming realm experts that Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, gathered by emptying the resources of the Eastern Theater of Operations, began to retreat one by one. There were more and more people. Those who left the battlefield were still moving away. They retreated in different directions and finally rushed in the same direction. That direction was outside the battlefield. Phoenix in a fiery red dress was still standing beside a monument less than 10 kilometers away, as if she was waiting for something. No one noticed it. Ning Qiansheng, who rushed in the front, didn't notice it. Wang Xingxiao, who rushed in the front, didn't notice it either. The heir of the Wang family of Beihai now focused all his attention on Li Tianlan. The white robe danced like a dragon in the heavy rain with silver light. Every moment, there was amazing brilliance. It was a kind of glory that Wang Xingxiao was very familiar with. For nearly 20 years after the fall of the Li family, this glory had always belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. Even Kunlun city was a little inferior. But now, there was Li Tianlan. He single-handedly destroyed the No. 6 Theater of Operations of East Island and killed Yuekong, an expert a half-step to invincible realm. Now, under the watchful eyes of the public, 3 experts of the thunder-shocking realm died without a complete corpse. And Li Tianlan was less than 20 years old this year. How glorious was he? Wang Xingxiao pursed his lips. This glory was so glorious and dazzling. As the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, how could he let the people of the Li family monopolize the glory? Under the curtain of rain, the white figure was vaguely guiding the direction of Zhongzhou state's breakout. Wang Xingxiao suddenly laughed. He looked at Firmament beside him and said calmly, "Help me." Firmament turned around with a stunned expression. "Lend me some sword intent." Wang Xingxiao said calmly and directly took off the huge iron sword on his back. This sword was called Firmament. Not only did it have the same name as Firmament, but Wang Xingxiao's sword intent was also very close to that of Firmament and Firmament sword. Firmament seemed to understand something. He looked at the huge sword in Wang Xingxiao's hand. This top expert of the half-step invincible realm of the Wang family of Beihai frowned, then nodded and said, "Okay." Wang Xingxiao laughed out loud. He dragged the heavy sword that was almost taller than him and ran wildly in the heavy rain. Even if Li Tianlan was dazzling, so what? In this battle, he had to tell everyone who was the number one expert of the young generation of Zhongzhou state. He had a sword. Even if he had to borrow a part of Firmament's sword intent, this sword was still his after all. Wang Xingxiao's figure rushed to the sky. The moment the huge sword was raised, the extremely dazzling blue lightning instantly connected heaven and earth. The storm stopped. There was only the rumbling of thunder high in the sky. Firmament looked at Wang Xingxiao, his body straightened, and the sword intent flashed away. The next second, all the sword intent in Wang Xingxiao's body burst out in the lightning. Firmament's sword intent reached the top of his head. With the help of the sword intent, Wang Xingxiao raised the sword edge very slowly. The roaring thunder stopped. Only Wang Xingxiao's clear and arrogant voice sounded between heaven and earth. 6 realms. The next second, all the people of the Wang family of Beihai roared as if they were crazy. 6 realms. The most powerful unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai was called 6 realms of reincarnation. It had dominated the dark world for hundreds of years, and no one could break it. Wang Xingxiao's sword was half a move. There was no reincarnation, only 6 realms. But half a move was enough. The unstoppable sword light suddenly pulled an arc hundreds of meters long between heaven and earth. The 2 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm of East Island who were closest to it didn't even have time to resist and were directly smashed into blood mist by the sword light. The sword light was mighty on the battlefield. The storm continued to fall. The sword intent in Wang Xingxiao didn't weaken, but became more and more majestic. Everywhere in the sky was a sea of blue. Wang Xingxiao stood in the air like a sun. The momentary brilliance attracted almost everyone's attention. In front of the battlefield, Li Tianlan just looked back and then continued to rush to the phalanx of the Jiang family of South America under the brilliance of the Wang family of Beihai. There was also another person who was not attracted by the sword light of the Wang family of Beihai. That person stood in the void far away, dressed in white. She stood quietly in the void, the long sword behind her trembled slightly, and her left hand gently held the gorgeous scarlet dagger with countless complex golden lines at her waist. She had been paying attention to Li Tianlan from beginning to end. The dagger in her hand was called mutual forgetting. But how could she forget? Chapter 249. The sword light spread in the sky, evaporated the rain, and covered the light. Under the 6 realms of the Wang family of Beihai, the whole battlefield was blue. The boundless sword intent boiled in the dark blue light, like a sudden gust of wind. In the blink of an eye, the sword intent of this sword had reached its peak. The flesh and blood of the 2 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm that were cut by the pure sword intent fell down. As the sword light condensed, it seemed to drive the whole world to roar together. Tiny electric lights intertwined. After being concentrated to the extreme, the light disappeared, but the blue was still there. Endless thunderbolts gathered toward Wang Xingxiao, and the blue spread in all directions. The firmament was edgeless. But as Wang Xingxiao raised the giant sword over his head with his arm, a dazzling sword light suddenly shone in the blue. The sky was full of killing intent. Wang Xingxiao stood steadily in the sky. With him as the center, endless thunderbolts spread out for hundreds of meters around him. The condensed sword light rose and fell like waves, and the whole dark blue light curtain was like a sea surrounding Wang Xingxiao. The sea was calm. For a moment, no one dared to move on the whole battlefield. Half of the 6 realms of reincarnation. As long as they thought of it, it was enough to make most people in the dark world feel numb. The light curtain in the sky did not disperse, and the heavy sword did not fall. At this time, Wang Xingxiao absolutely had a destructive power far beyond his realm. Who dared to stand in front of him? Wang Xingxiao raised the heavy sword with both hands. The heavy sword split the sky. He turned slightly. On the battlefield where light and shadows were messy and the rain was pouring and blood was splashing, the man and the sword faced Shinichi Miyamoto. There was a sudden wave in the silent battlefield. Everyone in Zhongzhou State felt their blood rush to the top of their heads. This was the demeanor of the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State, the future invincible figure of Zhongzhou State. When Li Tianlan charged forward, almost instinctively, everyone's eyes were focused on Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao quietly looked at Shinichi Miyamoto outside the light curtain and slightly narrowed his eyes. Unfortunately, it's only half a move. His voice passed through the heavy rain. The light curtain gathered around him became calmer and calmer, like stagnant water. Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes flickered. He and Wang Xingxiao were hundreds of meters apart, but in his sight, the sword edge was so close that it seemed to be right in front of him. He spoke softly, but as soon as he spoke, his pupils shrank. Li Tianlan didn't like nonsense, and neither did Wang Xingxiao. The battlefield had become a desperate situation, so they just had to kill. He held the firmament sword with both hands and silently cut through the void. The speed seemed fast yet slow, but the trajectory of the sword light as it tore through the void was filled with a kind of downright violence. The blue sea around Wang Xingxiao began to fluctuate. Under the firmament sword, a raging tide suddenly rose. Boom! A loud sound, as if the world had been smashed, rang out after the sword light, and the blue light curtain within a range of hundreds of meters was shattered by the peak of the sword. The sword will was boundless. There were thousands and tens of thousands of sword chi. The shattered light curtain was like a tide, crazily attacking the sky. Countless sword wills and sword chi suddenly merged into one. The shadow of a giant sword that spanned hundreds of meters appeared in the sky. Wang Xingxiao's sword fell. The giant sword rumbled through the sky, bringing with it a killing intent that could annihilate all living things as it came crashing down. This sword tore through the sky, it was indescribable. It was as if all the power and willpower were completely integrated into one with this sword. As the sword light chopped down, Wang Xingxiao's entire essence, qi, and spirit burst out unscrupulously with this sword in the most thorough way. Incisively and vividly. The most thorough outbreak. Wang Xingxiao's eyes were focused and wild. He used all his strength in this sword. This sword was desperate. The whistling sound of the giant sword filled all the ears. In a trance, Wang Xingxiao heard the sound of breaking inside his body. Left and right arms, left and right legs. The sound of breaking surged inside his limbs. In an instant, his whole body, which had been exhausted, suddenly burst out with a frightening power again. Pure power. He broke through. In the strongest sword move of his life, Wang Xingxiao broke through. What he broke through was not the realm. It was the second evolution of his wind and thunder veins. Faster speed, stronger power. Wang Xingxiao suddenly let out a long roar. Although his realm did not move forward, the second evolution of his wind and thunder veins almost doubled his overall strength. At this moment, he was just at the beginning of the thunder-shocking realm, but he was sure to tear apart most superiors of the half-step invincible realm. The sword intent that had climbed to the extreme seemed to break through the invisible shackles, and its power instantly grew stronger. Shinichi Miyamoto's face changed. In the face of this sword, he was not afraid, but for a moment he had the idea of avoiding its sharpness. He was the person in charge of the divine wind force, the palace master of Liuhua Palace. But to put it bluntly, he was a ninja. Even if he was an invincible realm ninja, defense and attack were not his strong points. When facing a super strong attack head-on, as a ninja, Shinichi Miyamoto's first thought was to dodge. But now, he could not retreat. Because he was the only superior of the invincible realm in the field, and because behind him were countless elite forces of the East Island's secret service system. The sword intent in the void converged, but the shadow of the giant sword became more and more real. Wang Xingxiao stood on the other side, hundreds of meters away, and cut the invincible realm with a sword. The mighty sword intent was like an avalanche. Shinichi Miyamoto took a step forward with cold eyes. In the face of this earth-shattering sword, he raised his hand. The giant sword fell. Shinichi Miyamoto's body shook, and he suddenly let out a roar. With Shinichi Miyamoto as the center, all the void around him within a radius of 100 meters was completely still. This was a domain. The domain that really belonged to the superior of the invincible realm. The void within a radius of 100 meters was formed. No enemy could invade. Shinichi Miyamoto's most powerful unique technique. The void was still. Boom. The shadow of the giant sword made a final explosion before it cut into the still void, and then the horrible sword instantly stopped moving. The giant sword fiercely cut the air around Shinichi Miyamoto, which was already different. In the domain, the shadow suddenly slowed down, and then became smaller. The shadow of hundreds of meters shrank to less than 100 meters in the blink of an eye, and then it was still shrinking violently. Endless blue lightning burst out in the shadow, and then disappeared in the blink of an eye. The void was still. In Shinichi Miyamoto's domain of the invincible realm, there was no thunderbolt, no raging fire, and no ice. There was only himself. The shadow of the giant sword kept shrinking, but the sword intent was getting colder and colder. The still void was still shaking crazily. The air around Shinichi Miyamoto was obviously twisted, unstable, and about to break. Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes focused, and he instantly made a move. A punch. An ordinary fist suddenly brought up a fierce wind in the void. Shinichi Miyamoto's punch hit the shadow of the giant sword that had shrunk to less than 10 meters. The silent void was completely twisted. The still void and Wang Xingxiao's giant sword broke at the same time. The remaining sword light broke through the broken domain and rushed out like a tide. Shinichi Miyamoto was unscathed. The superior of the thunder-shocking realm beside him was unscathed. But the sharp sword intent roared in the crowd behind them. Blood burst out, and a large number of superiors of the fire-flaming realm and the ice-condensing realm, who were elites in the special warfare system of East Island, exploded. Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes suddenly straightened, and his killing intent instantly became violent. After the breakthrough of the wind and thunder veins, Wang Xingxiao became calmer and calmer, facing Shinichi Miyamoto's killing intent calmly. The Wang family of Beihai? Nothing more than that. Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and laughed in anger. He didn't even dare to look back at the losses behind him. Nothing more than that? Wang Xingxiao sneered. Give me another 5 years, and I'll kill you like a dog. How dare you? For a moment, all the superiors behind Shinichi Miyamoto were furious. But they just said it was presumptuous. No one dared to say it was arrogant. Who knew what Wang Xingxiao would be like in 5 years? Wang Xingxiao shook the sword and laughed wildly. The heavy and blunt firmament rose again. The blade trembled under the great force. This time, he was still pointing at Shinichi Miyamoto. Everyone, do you dare to come with me to kill him? Under the heavy sword of firmament, the superior of the half-step invincible realm of the Wang family of Beihai, was the first to stand out and roared, "Kill!" The enchantress, Black Pupil, Wang Zhaoyang, the commander of the Shadow Sting army, and others stood out at the same time. Waving the heavy sword in the air, Wang Xingxiao roared and rushed directly to Shinichi Miyamoto like a cannonball. So bold. So arrogant. The morale of Zhongzhou State instantly rose again. First, he was treated rudely by Li Tianlan, and then he was provoked by Wang Xingxiao. Shinichi Miyamoto had been extremely angry. In his sight, Wang Xingxiao's figure was getting closer and closer. Shinichi Miyamoto no longer cared about his identity and face. He took a step forward and directly attacked. Go to hell. In the voice that echoed between heaven and earth, his figure appeared directly in front of Wang Xingxiao. A punch. Without a sound, the air was completely broken, and all the sounds disappeared completely. A big hand glowing with a transparent luster suddenly reached out from in front of Wang Xingxiao. The big hand moved forward and slapped hard on Shinichi Miyamoto's fist. A huge roar suddenly came from the silent void. Wang Xingxiao's figure suddenly sank under the impact of the huge force. A nearly transparent figure appeared in Wang Xingxiao's position. A man who looked like a young man or a middle-aged man appeared in front of Shinichi Miyamoto and said with a chuckle, "Miyamoto, do you dare to fight with me?" General of 9 Heavens of Zhongzhou State, Gong Sun Qi. And the nearly transparent clothes on him were the 4 spirits armor, which was famous in the dark world. Without saying a word, Shinichi Miyamoto directly rushed to Gong Sun Qi. With Gong Sun Qi's action, all the people of Zhongzhou State followed Wang Xingxiao. Just like at the beginning of the charge, people followed the people of Sai City to rush to Li Tianlan. It was the general trend that couldn't be stopped. The crowd collided and killed each other. Wang Xingxiao and Li Tianlan. Invisibly, they rushed in 2 directions on the battlefield. Fighting for a country. Fighting for a person. Fighting for a clan. Moving forward with indomitable will. Chapter 250. Tossing, fighting, colliding, retreating, chasing. Once the war started, it couldn't stop until there was an end. For any force, this was a fierce and anxious battle. The war lasted from early morning to afternoon. The rainstorm had stopped, the sun rose, and the dim light gradually slanted to the west. The sunlight after the rain was not so clear and bright. The whole battlefield was filled with a strong and almost pungent smell of blood. The dried blood was still among the corpses, like a frozen river. The cannon fodder that East Island put into the battlefield had been wiped out, and the bodies were scattered in every corner inside and outside the village. The Jiang family of South America, the Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, Knights Templars, and Fantasy World joined hands with East Island to take action a few hours ago. Experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm started to join the battlefield, then experts at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, and finally experts of the half-step Invincible Realm showed up in person. Siege. Whether they were ordinary elites or real experts, everyone was sparing no effort to kill everyone in Zhongzhou State. The lightning swam in the raging fire, and the fire shot straight up to the sky. The moisture after the rain had been completely evaporated. It was almost evening, and the wind was blowing in Changdao, but the battlefield was still extremely hot and depressing. Zhongzhou State had already suffered heavy losses, but the team of less than 2,000 people showed amazing tenacity in the face of the siege of all the superpowers. All the experts above the Thunder-Shocking Realm rushed to the front, and it could almost be described as scrambling to be the first. This kind of fanatical fighting desire, plus East Island, the ordinary elites of the 6 superpowers suffered heavy losses in the first charge of Zhongzhou State. The experts of the 6 superpowers had to stand at the front as well, to block the attack of Zhongzhou State. What was a decisive battle? When there was no way out, it was a battle of soldiers against soldiers, generals against generals, a battle of life and death. Some people died, and some people lived. The war had been going on for more than 10 hours, and the team of Zhongzhou State, which had nearly 2,000 people, had less than 800 left, and everyone was injured, but they still moved as fast as the wind. Forward. They kept rushing forward. There were enemies in all directions, which also meant that there were directions to break out of the encirclement. From beginning to end, no one in Zhongzhou State shouted to break out of the encirclement, and no one shouted to retreat. Similarly, they never broke through the enemy's barrier in any direction. The only achievement of Zhongzhou State was to cause several times more damage to the enemy than their own. The result was big, but also small. After all, no matter how much the enemy lost, it was also borne by the 6 families. Only the central continent kept losing blood. The war continued in indescribable anxiety and misery. There were fewer and fewer people in Zhongzhou State. There seemed to be only one path waiting for them. There was only defeat and death. The earth was stained with blood. The sky was vast and mighty. When the gentle and gorgeous afterglow of the setting sun shone down, the sky above the battlefield was suddenly filled with darkness. It was not the alternation of day and night after nightfall. When the darkness first appeared, it was just a tiny speck. The dim yellow sunlight shone on every corner of the battlefield. This speck of darkness that suddenly appeared was like a drop of ink under the light. Chaotic and sharp whistling sounds instantly erupted around the darkness. A huge sense of crisis suddenly enveloped the entire area. The great power fluctuating in the air was instantly swallowed up by the darkness, which expanded to hundreds of meters in the shortest time. Dead silence spread in the darkness, and a large number of elites of Zhongzhou State and the 6 superpowers were shrouded in it at the same time. In the center of the darkness was Shinichi Miyamoto. And opposite of him was Gong Sun Chi. After more than 10 hours of fighting, Gong Sun Chi, who was not in the invincible realm, held up the only expert in the invincible realm, Shinichi Miyamoto. The power that could change the whole situation was firmly contained. Gong Sun Chi was a little embarrassed and weak. But Shinichi Miyamoto, who was on the strong side, also did not play his due role. More than 10 hours. Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes were deep and cold. His close-fitting ninja suit had been torn, revealing his bleeding skin. But he stood in the darkness, exuding an almost violent killing intent. Non-entity. The darkness kept spreading. Shinichi Miyamoto stared in the direction of Gong Sun Chi, with undisguised anger and killing intent in his voice. He raised his palm, and a large piece of darkness suddenly began to fluctuate wildly. The space of hundreds of meters suddenly broke into pieces and returned to nothingness. Go to hell. In the almost crazy killing intent, Shinichi Miyamoto's palm fiercely chopped down. Heaven and earth suddenly roared. Void stillness. Shinichi Miyamoto's strongest move was also a move that he tried his best. After more than 10 hours, he failed to take down Gong Sun Chi. Shinichi Miyamoto only felt angry and humiliated. Anyone under the invincible realm was a non-entity. Otherwise, how could an invincible realm expert be called invincible? But Gong Sun Chi had held him here for 10 hours. Shinichi Miyamoto, who had completely lost his patience, was completely furious. Even if he had to pay a price, he had to kill this famous Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State, who was known as the strongest expert under the invincible realm. The domain of the invincible realm was fully opened in the dusk. The darkness was tumbling. The light was broken. Pure darkness instantly wrapped Gong Sun Chi's body. Gong Sun Chi's clothes kept glowing, and the subtle light became dimmer and dimmer in the darkness. Sound, light, power, and air were directly swallowed by the darkness. Shinichi Miyamoto's body shook, and he instantly crossed a distance of hundreds of meters. The power that belonged to the invincible realm directly burst out beside Gong Sun Chi. The light on Gong Sun Chi disappeared. He disappeared into the darkness without a sound. This was not Gong Sun Chi's own ability, but the clothes he wore. For Spirit's armor, Azure Dragon. For Spirit's armor was one of the strongest individual defense equipment in Zhongzhou State. It could be repaired after being damaged, but it could not be copied. More than 80% of the 4 clothes were woven with cloud silk, and their defense power was unparalleled in the world. In addition, each of the 4 clothes represented a top technology of Zhongzhou State. In addition to being strong, the Azure Dragon armor's biggest feature was stealth. The essence of the top optical camouflage technology of Zhongzhou State was used on the Azure Dragon armor. Once Gong Sun Chi, wearing the Azure Dragon armor, entered the state of battle, as long as there was light, his stealth was not inferior to that of an invincible realm expert. Day, night, and even the void. There was light. With the existence of light, if Gong Sun Chi did not take the initiative to attack, no one could lock his position. Shinichi Miyamoto could not lock Gong Sun Chi's position either. But he was fast enough. The void stillness was his vacuum domain. There was no air resistance in the vacuum. With the power of the invincible realm, he only needed one step to cross a distance of hundreds of meters. Gong Sun Chi was stealth, but he actually existed. Since he could not catch his figure, he would destroy everything. Destroy. Shinichi Miyamoto's cold voice sounded before he could stabilize his body. The void stillness destroy. The unparalleled power suddenly expanded in the darkness, and there was a clear cracking sound in the air. Light appeared in the darkness, and it seemed to be cracks. More and more cracks appeared. When the dim sun shone into the darkness, the domain of the invincible realm hundreds of meters around Shinichi Miyamoto suddenly began to explode. The black domain was completely broken. Black spots appeared in the air one after another. Countless lightning, fire, and frost hovered around a large number of black spots, and a hurricane followed. Shinichi Miyamoto did not move. But with this move of destruction, the area hundreds of meters around him instantly turned into a death zone. Fire, lightning, frost, and strong wind were flying. No one or thing could escape the devastation of this huge power. This was the invincible realm. It was the ultimate power after the four realms of martial arts were completely sublimated. Shinichi Miyamoto personally blew up his domain. So, chi commanding, ice condensing, fire flaming, and thunder shocking realm. The power of the four realms burst out at the same time. The battlefield was turbulent. It could destroy heaven and earth. Gong Sun Chi's figure reappeared in the sky, which had been ravaged beyond recognition. His figure was still straight, but the next second, he suddenly staggered and almost fell from the sky. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and the azure dragon armor was already dim. His aura directly changed from strong to weak in a short time. He raised his head and looked at Shinichi Miyamoto, his body slightly trembling. "You're courting death." Shinichi Miyamoto's aura seemed to be a little weaker, but his voice was still indifferent and majestic. Gong Sun Chi smiled, as if he was mocking himself. He said, "If," he just said if and didn't continue. There was no if in the dark world. If he hadn't stopped at the half-step invincible realm because of the injury when he tried to break through to the invincible realm, Shinichi Miyamoto would have become a corpse now. But there was no if. It had become a fact that he had no hope of reaching the invincible realm in this life. Gong Sun Chi's eyes were a little helpless, sad, and emotional. He was also a big shot standing above the dark world, but after all, he couldn't take the last step to see the scenery at the top. If he couldn't break through, then he would fulfill his wish. Shinichi Miyamoto stretched out one hand. 100 meters away, he pressed down on Gong Sun Chi. The air that the sunlight passed through suddenly exploded, and a powerful force directly appeared in front of Gong Sun Chi. "Then I'll fulfill his wish," Gong Sun Chi said to himself. His body fell down. "Resist." A low and hoarse voice sounded. A large mass of air suddenly condensed and rotated in the sky that became dark again. Above the sky, the air was layered, and in the blink of an eye, a transparent cloud appeared. Shinichi Miyamoto pressed down with his palm, and the void reappeared. But the darkness hit the transparent cloud, but it couldn't break the thick air cloud. That was the scene after the chi-controlling realm broke through one peak after another. Tribulation appeared where Gong Sun Chi was. He looked at Shinichi Miyamoto and said calmly, "Fight." Shinichi Miyamoto's pupils contracted slightly. A new black void appeared and disappeared. The broken fragments of the invincible realm were still raging on the battlefield, with frost and lightning. Dongqing Rushi was also looking at the frost and lightning. In the light and shadow of the explosion all over the sky, the intertwined colors were so strong and gorgeous. The scattered power of the invincible realm kept exploding. The moment the blood and flesh splashed, they were destroyed by the power. The power was still raging after falling, with monstrous killing intent. Dongqing Rushi felt it was familiar. After the sublimation of the four realms of martial arts, it was the invincible realm. After the invincible realm was scattered, it was the four realms of martial arts. All kinds of light and shadow exploded in the air and on the ground, and the black spots fell. Every time they spread, the silent sword in Dongqing Rushi's hand would tremble slightly. Her eyes were no longer confused, but more beautiful and clear. Du Hanin, who was very close to Dongqing Rushi, was surprised to find that Dongqing Rushi was about to break through. A 19-year-old at the peak of the fire-flaming realm was breaking through. Was she in the half-step thunder-shocking realm? There was a violent roar in the air. Tribulation and Shinichi Miyamoto had already started fighting. The moment the void suddenly appeared, the extremely twisted gas cloud surged and exploded. The air and the void began to blend, and several transparent shadows appeared around Tribulation. An extremely fierce killing intent suddenly swept through the sky and the earth. On the ground, Dongqing Rushi suddenly clenched the silence in her hand. The long sword swept out with its scabbard, and Dongqing Rushi's figure directly burst out a dazzling sword light. The sword light was fierce and swift, and it rushed out dozens of meters in the blink of an eye. The silence kept ringing in the sword light. The team led by a fire-flaming realm expert from East Island was instantly torn into pieces by the sword light. This was not one of the sword movements that Dongqing Rushi specialized in, but it was also one of the 7 swords of Jade Pool. Aurora Glimpse. The flame with faint blue electric light spread with the sword light. After the heavy rain, Dongqing Rushi, who was stained with some mud because of the battle, stood with the sword in her hand, looking more and more beautiful like a fairy. A 19-year-old half a step to the thunder-shocking realm. Even in the era of Wang Xingxiao, Li Tianlan, Gu Hanshan, and other young heavenly sons, Dongqing Rushi still had her own elegance. The sword light and the raging fire dissipated. A surging thunderbolt suddenly fell. The thunderbolt appeared in the distant sky. After a flash, it had already reached the top of Dongqing Rushi's head. Dongqing Rushi suddenly raised her head and raised her sword. The raging fire suddenly condensed into a straight line and rushed up to the sky. The fire and the lightning collided. In just a moment, the thunderbolt dispersed the raging fire and hit the silence. Dongqing Rushi's body shook violently. She was uncontrollably hit and flew out more than 10 meters away from the crowd around her. A figure appeared behind the bright thunderbolt. In just a flash, it was already close to Dongqing Rushi, who flew out. Demon. Thunder God, who had been near Dongqing Rushi, suddenly roared. Demon. The Deputy Palace Master of Liohua Palace, the top ninja in East Island, a superior a half step to the invincible realm. Zhongzhou State was plotting against East Island. This time, there were too many valuable people. Not to mention the 3 young heavenly sons, Dongqing Rushi, whose father controlled the border control corps of Zhongzhou State, was also extraordinarily valuable to East Island. How could an ordinary person let the Deputy Palace Master of Liohua Palace take action in person? Flash. Demon, who was in tight clothes, seemed to be walking in the void. She was extremely fast. Everyone only felt dizzy, and then Demon's figure was already above Dongqing Rushi. A delicate short knife appeared in her hand. The short knife stabbed straight down. This knife was not enough to kill Dongqing Rushi, but it was enough to make her lose the ability to move instantly and then be captured by her. Stop. At the same time, not only Thunder God, but also by Yuming, Su Chu, Ning Qiansheng, Li Beidian, and Du Hanin rushed to Dongqing Rushi almost at the same time. These people were originally together. At first, they were also the ones who led the troops to charge toward Li Tianlan. At this time, even if they changed directions, they didn't separate. Dongqing Rushi's body was about to fall. Her eyes were still clear. Under the threat of the sharp edge of the short knife in Demon's hand, she suddenly reached out and was about to pull out the sword regardless of everything. The thunderbolt raged down and hit Dongqing Rushi's arm. Dongqing Rushi's arm suddenly fell down. Demon's soft and charming eyes suddenly lit up with excitement. She waved the short knife and stabbed down. She was a ninja a half step to the invincible realm. Dongqing Rushi couldn't fight back at all when she suddenly made a sneak attack. Thunder God and the others were a little further away. At this moment, who could stop her? The person who could stop her was not in front of her. And in the sky, in the very distant void, the woman in white, who had been watching this fierce battle from beginning to end, was still hiding in the void, motionless. She had already returned the glittering and translucent dagger with golden patterns to her waist. The battle continued. The rain stopped, and the sun rose. Time passed. From early morning to dusk, she didn't move, just watching quietly. Most of the time, she was looking at Li Tianlan. Occasionally, she would look at the battlefield. But intentionally or unintentionally, her eyes would always quietly sweep over one place on the battlefield. Even though no one had noticed her, her gaze seemed to be a little guilty, and she seemed to be avoiding eye contact. At the moment when the sun was about to set, she took another look. The sharp edge of the Aurora glimpse sword lit up. The raging fire and the thunderbolt flickered faintly in her sight. Until the evil spirit descended with that shocking bolt of lightning. A sharp light suddenly flashed in the woman in white's eyes. Dongqing Rushi's body was hit and flew out. Demon was above Dongqing Rushi. The woman in white's body suddenly tightened. The dagger at her waist didn't tremble, but the long sword behind her suddenly unsheathed. The snow-white edge of the sword flashed. A seemingly subtle sword intent instantly broke through the confinement of heaven and earth. Demon stabbed the dagger in her hand without hesitation. Before the dagger fell, the sword intent had crossed a distance of thousands of meters. Puff! There was no sound, no defense. The sharp sword intent directly rushed into the back of Demon's head and directly annihilated Demon's vitality in the shortest time. The dagger was released from her hand and fell into Dongqing Rushi's hand. Dongqing Rushi caught the dagger and looked at Demon, who fell on the ground with a frightened face, her eyes confused. From a distance of thousands of meters, a sword intent killed a half-step invincible realm expert. The moment the sword intent appeared, Gong Sun Chi, who had fallen on the ground, seemed to notice something. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the void where the woman in white was. Tribulation and Shinichi Miyamoto, who were fighting, also slightly stiffened. Firmament frowned. The void where their eyes met, intentionally or unintentionally, had already calmed down. In another direction, the white-robed woman silently reappeared in the slightly distorted space. She looked at Li Tianlan again. The slightly floating wind lifted the layer of white veil on her face. The white dress and the veil were dancing. His fairy-like appearance was like a banished immortal. 24 moves of sword. On a high hillside in the north of the battlefield, the moment Demon was killed by a sword, two figures, one black and one white, were moved at the same time. The first super master of Samsara Palace, Saint, was wrapped in a black cloak. Beside him was Daybreak, who was in white clothes and white shoes. Saint's eyes were also looking at the place where the woman in white disappeared. He frowned with a serious face and said, "Who's there?" Daybreak, who was even more shocked than Saint, turned his head as if he had seen a ghost. He looked at Saint and frowned. "Not your palace master?" In the battle with Gu Xingyun, the master of Samsara Palace used 24 moves of sword to conquer Gu Xingyun's 10 skills of true martial arts. It was no secret in the dark world. No. Saint was silent for a while and shook his head. First, she resisted the blow of Blue Sky Underworld, and then she was hit by Wang Tianzong's sword. After the battle with Gu Xingyun, she was injured. He said calmly, "Now the palace master can't take action. I can roughly guess the injury of the master of Samsara Palace." Daybreak narrowed his eyes. Now the palace master is seriously injured, but at least she still has the power to make a blow. Just now. Saint still shook his head and said calmly, "She used that blow." Daybreak's face finally became pale. He looked at the direction where the woman in white disappeared. After a long silence, he said calmly, "Who could it be?" Saint didn't say anything. He majored in swordsmanship. Therefore, he could clearly feel how terrifying that sword strike was. That sword was silent, but it seemed to tear heaven and earth in an instant. He couldn't do it. Ordinary invincible realm experts couldn't do it either. 24 moves of sword, Daybreak murmured to himself. He suddenly frowned and seemed to think of something. He sneered and said, 24 moves of sword. His tone was a little gloomy, a little angry, a little cold, and his whole person seemed to become indifferent. 24 moves of sword was the secret of the Li family and the Lin clan. In this dark world, how could there be so many experts who could use 24 moves of sword and could use them so well? Do you have any clues? Saint suddenly asked. No. Daybreak shook his head. His handsome and almost demonic face was completely twisted, and killing intent flashed in his eyes. I just have some guesses. Saint was puzzled. Daybreak took a deep look at him. Thinking of his position, he smiled and said blandly, it should be a woman. What woman? Saint was more and more confused. Damn woman. Daybreak replied with a cold face. The setting sun went down in the west. The night of the 7th day began to fall. There were less than 500 people in Zhongzhou state. Fire-flaming realm experts began to die. Thunder-shocking realm experts began to die. Dongqing Rushi and the others did not return to the main force. As soon as Demon died, East Island suddenly strengthened its offensive. The experts and elites of the other 5 superpowers also surrounded them at all costs. The crowd was surging, the killing moves were frequent, and the fierce attacks were fierce. A large number of people almost broke up the remaining troops of Zhongzhou state. Sai City, Eastern Theater of Operations, Mount Shu, Bai Yuming, Thunder God, Dongqing Rushi, Su Chu, and the others were still together. In the other direction, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City were also together. They could not meet. A large number of people were approaching crazily. When there was a huge gap in strength, the so-called morale could not play a decisive role at all. The scattered people of Zhongzhou state began to retreat. Or rather, he was being chased away. All the way to the north. The camp of the Jiang family of South America was in the north. Li Tianlan was also in the north. Further north was a small piece of mountainous land. Behind the mountainous land was the edge of the battlefield, which was the sea. The battlefield moved to the north, getting closer and closer to Saint and Daybreak. Saint and Daybreak were still watching the battlefield in silence, calm and collected. He's dying. Daybreak, who had calmed down, suddenly said, he's an arrow at the end of its flight. If he doesn't make a move now, I'm afraid it'll be too late. Saint narrowed his eyes and looked at the battlefield. In the northernmost position of the battlefield, countless elites of the Jiang family of South America were surrounding a young man in white. White. Silver halberd. Swift and fierce, unparalleled decisiveness. Li Tianlan was still fighting. In the 10-hour battle, East Island, the Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, Fantasy World, Knights Templars, the Jiang family of South America, and countless elites fell under the silver edge. Among the enemies in all directions, he was moving forward step by step. More than 10 hours. He still did not see the person in charge of the Jiang family of South America this time. But as Daybreak said, at this point, he was really an arrow at the end of its flight. Saint said, and did not say anything. You don't make a move? Daybreak turned to look at Saint, looking surprised. Not interested. Saint said calmly. Daybreak's expression changed from surprise to astonishment. He had thought of many possibilities, but he never thought that when Li Tianlan was about to fall, in this situation, Saint would say that he was not interested in saving Li Tianlan. What the F***ck? Daybreak shook his head in confusion and chuckled. That's interesting. If your boss knows, I'm here to carry out the task my boss gave me. Saint said in a low voice, and there was also some confusion in his voice. Task? Daybreak looked at Saint. Isn't your task to protect Li Tianlan? Don't pretend. Since you're here, I guess the other super masters of Samsara in East Island are not far from Li Tianlan now. If you don't make a move now, don't go too far. Protect Li Tianlan? Saint murmured and then shook his head, no, it's not. If I'm right, that should be your task. Your Highness gave you the order to protect Li Tianlan, right? Daybreak's expression froze. Before he spoke, Saint said calmly, but we are not. So your task and mine are different. The mysterious Highness gave Daybreak the order to protect Li Tianlan. But the task the boss gave him and the other super masters was completely different. Their most important task. It was to protect Li Tianlan's corpse. Yes, the corpse. What the hell do you want to do? Daybreak's face darkened. He thought of a possibility. Saint didn't answer his question. If you do this, aren't you afraid? No. Saint interrupted Daybreak and said calmly and confidently, everything is under the boss's control. Daybreak was so angry that he laughed. He turned around and looked to the north. The battlefield was getting closer to the north. From the perspective of Daybreak and Saint, the battlefield was in the south, and the sea was in their north. The night covered the long island. The tide rose and fell by the sea. A light lit up on the sea, which seemed to be far and near. It was very high, like a lighthouse. The light, like a lighthouse, rushed to the sky and then suddenly exploded. There was no sound on the sea. But the bright light lit up the night and didn't disappear for a long time. In the battlefield, the camp of East Island suddenly burst into cheers that shook the sky. Everyone's morale was greatly boosted. As if they were responding to the cheers. A long roar suddenly came from the sea and went straight into the night sky. The long roar was full and powerful, with sword intent and strong wind, stirring the night. The signal flare that rose in the night fell. The wind suddenly blew on the sea, and the sword intent soared to the sky. Saint and Daybreak looked at the sea in silence. It's coming. Daybreak said. The distance was too far, so he couldn't distinguish the sword intent on the sea, but he could completely feel the momentum. In the entire East Island, there was only one person who could stir the sea with sword intent. Lusheng Sangxuan, the sect master of Jifeng Sword Raining School, the Invincible Realm Grand Master. He was here, and Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, would definitely be with him. The first batch of East Island experts trapped in Huading had begun to return. And it was probably the strongest batch. There were less than 300 people in Zhongzhou State. Daybreak turned around resolutely and rushed to Li Tianlan's direction. Saint stood where he was, looking at the Zhongzhou State team that was getting smaller and smaller, motionless. The wild wave was coming. The wild wave was about to fall. Chapter 251. The neat and orderly formation of Zhongzhou State was finally in chaos. No matter how elite or superior they were, under such circumstances, it was impossible for them to be as strong-willed as a mountain. After more than 10 hours of fierce fighting, there were less than 300 elites left from less than 2,000 people. He was still surrounded by enemies in all directions, densely packed together. The elites of East Island cheered and charged forward. A long whistle with strong sword intent swept over from the North Sea. The remaining troops of Zhongzhou State were forced to enter the mountain area. The mountain area was only a kilometer from the coast. The weaker their side was, the stronger the enemy was. The closer they were to death. This was a desperate picture, and there was no light at all. The morale of the army began to shake and gradually collapse. The team of less than 300 people faced enemies several times more than them, and the casualty rate suddenly skyrocketed. The real superiors were still fighting. But in front of the general trend, a country was like grass, and the invincible realm was like a nonentity. No one could save the situation. The battle between Tribulation and Shinichi Miyamoto continued, but it was no longer a one-on-one fight. Tian Yu, the high priest of ISE Grand Shrine, appeared in the battle group, and his figure was looming. Shinichi Miyamoto, who was suppressing Tribulation, attacked more and more violently. Every time Tian Yu's figure appeared, he would add a deep wound to Tribulation. Blood spilled in the air. Holy Light, the head of the 8 Knights of Knights Templars, directly confronted Gu Zhendong, the the superior of the half-step invincible realm of Kunlun City. The 10 skills of true martial arts and the secret skills of the Vatican collided violently. Light and thunder burst out at the same time, and the night in a large area was as bright as day. Wang Xingxiao encountered King Bear of the Polar Ground Alliance. After the second evolution, his wind and thunder veins became more and more perfect in terms of speed and strength. However, in the face of King Bear's terrifying strength, which was infinitely close to the invincible realm, even though Wang Xingxiao could barely hold on, he began to lose ground after a short fight. That was the gap of an era. It had nothing to do with talent or aptitude, but time. The 2 guards of the royal family, Glacier and Tide, targeted the ice crystal and frost sword of Kunlun City. The 2 superiors of the half-step invincible realm suppressed the 2 superiors of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The moment the coldness of the ice crystal and frost sword bloomed, they were forcibly suppressed. The bright sword light shattered the night, whistling across the night sky, and one of Ice Crystal's arms fell directly with blood. It could be said that Firmament and Ben's eyes reddened when they saw each other. The Wang family of Beihai and the Heroes Club were old enemies. On the battlefield where the enemy was clearly distinguished, the 2 went all out and killed crazily as soon as they fought. The battlefield between the 2 of them moved directly from the front to the back of Zhongzhou State. Ben was fighting desperately, pushing Firmament away from Wang Xingxiao, who was suppressed by King Bear. Enchantress and Black Pupil were also moving. Although there were no superiors of the half-step invincible realm around them, there were more than 5 superiors of the thunder-shocking realm. Bai Yuming had temporarily retreated from the battlefield because of serious injuries. Thunder God was still struggling. Beside him were Deep Dream and Su Chu. The power of Sai City and the Dongqing clan had long stood together. But on the vast battlefield, this powerful force in the past was like a lonely boat in a tsunami that could be capsized at any time. The Eastern Theater of Operations was almost completely wiped out. At the last moment of the war, Ning Qianqing found that there were less than 10 fire-flaming realm experts from the Eastern Theater of Operations who came from Zhongzhou State to Changdao. The crowd was surging. The slaughter continued. In the Eastern Theater of Operations, the remaining forces of the Dongqing clan and Sai City began to gather. And in front of them was Mount Shu. The swordsmen of Mount Shu also suffered heavy casualties. The Yin and Yang sword master Han Chongyang and Li Beidian stood together. The black and white broad-edged Yin and Yang sword had been completely unsheathed. The sword radiance was like thunder. Hardness and softness, attack and defense, life and death. The brilliant sword radiance kept flowing all over Han Chongyang's body. The sword intent was exquisite and almost perfect. Endless lightning surged down like a raging river. The people of the Dongqing clan, the Eastern Theater of Operations, and Sai City followed behind Mount Shu. The Yin and Yang sword vibrated slightly, and the amazing lightning flowed and spread, immediately wrapping and protecting all the people of the 3 forces. Han Chongyang was moving forward. Crow and the elites of the fantasy world behind him were retreating. Han Chongyang's expression was calm and solemn. He gently raised the Yin and Yang sword. The Yin and Yang sword intent gathered from the sword edge without reservation. Han Chongyang held the long sword with both hands. A large amount of blue lightning burst out the moment he raised the long sword. 2 different sword intents blended perfectly in the lightning, but Han Chongyang's palms had separated. The Yin and Yang sword with a wide blade disappeared, and 2 thin swords, one black and one white, appeared in Han Chongyang's hands. Yin and Yang sword. Yin and Yang swords. Han Chongyang had been the Yin and Yang sword master of Mount Shu for nearly 16 years. This was the first time he had successfully separated the Yin and Yang swords. The sword intent was mighty. Han Chongyang's aura sword. After this battle, if he didn't die, 3 of the 4 sword masters of Mount Shu would be in the half-step invincible realm. On the battlefield today, an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm had crossed the limit and become an expert of the half-step invincible realm. For Zhongzhou State, he could definitely be regarded as a strong aide. But even if he was a strong aide, he couldn't turn the situation around. There were less than 200 people left in the team of Zhongzhou State. More than 100 people with the strongest combat capability, the greatest influence, and the most valuable. The general trend had been decided. Zhongzhou State. The country with the most powerful comprehensive national power in the world was about to suffer the heaviest loss in the dark world in recent decades. In the dark night. Before dawn. The plan of the whole country was exchanged for the most painful failure. It was irreversible. Countless enemies gathered together, drove, and chased the elites of Zhongzhou State all the way to the north. All of the hope and dawn became dim and illusory in the deep night. There was only despair in Zhongzhou State. More than 100 of the most powerful combat capability were forced to retreat to the north. On the hillside in the north, Saint turned around and changed his position. The sound of tide gradually rose by the sea. The long roar that surged on the sea finally became clear. The sword intent passed through the waves with the gale, and a figure rushed directly to the battlefield like a stream of light. The low and cold voice echoed between heaven and earth with the surging waves. Raining sword with wind. Raining sword with wind. The roar of thousands of troops and horses burst out from the ground at the same time, and countless cheers were boiling. The sword light in the air swept over the sea and the hillside, without slowing down at all, and went straight into the battlefield. The sword light suddenly became extremely bright in the night. The sword light rushed into the crowd with the sudden gale. In the completely condensed dazzling lightning, blood suddenly flew. The endless lightning disappeared. The blazing light also began to dissipate. The sword light closed. Lushing Sangshuan, the Kendo Grand Master of East Island in a kimono, appeared in the night sky. Beside him, the half-step invincible realm expert of Kunlun City, Gu Zhendong, had completely stiffened. His body moved with difficulty, and before he could say a word, his whole body directly burst into a cloud of blood mist. The blood mist sprayed on Holy Light, the Grand Knight of Knights Templars. Holy Light, who was covered in blood, bowed slightly to Lushing Sangshuan and said calmly, "Welcome back, Your Highness." Lushing Sangshuan squinted at Holy Light, as if he wanted to take action, but finally, he flicked his wide sleeves and said calmly, "Kill them all." No. A sharp scream suddenly rang out on the ground. King Bear's almost violent roar responded to the scream. In front of him, Wang Xingshao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, flew out, and Black Pupil's figure flew into the air. The enchantress's scream was shrill and helpless. Her body flew into the air, but the huge King Bear arrived in front of Black Pupil first. Black Pupil raised her head with blood on the corner of her mouth. The pupils without white were as dark as ink. She glanced over the battlefield, saw the blood, saw the chaos, but did not see the man who deserved her to give everything and betray everything without regret. Wang Xiaoyao was not on the battlefield, not by his side, and never by his side. The corner of Black Pupil's mouth moved. She did not have time to say the name, and King Bear's huge fist had directly hit her. Puff! Blood gushed out of her mouth, and the heart of this expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm of the Wang family of Beihai was smashed by a punch. Her body fell from the air, and the pupils without white looked straight at the night sky. After the heavy rain, it was a clear night. The starry sky was bright. Brighter than her pupils. Lushing Sangshuan, who saw all this with his own eyes, curled his lips cruelly and whispered to himself, "When everything is over, it will be time for our 6 forces to conquer Zhongzhou State together." He took a step forward in the air and subconsciously wanted to rush to the seriously injured Wang Xingshao. An extremely powerful and abundant aura suddenly burst out in the night. Lushing Sangshuan suddenly turned his head and looked at the northernmost part of the battlefield. He frowned. There seemed to be the direction of the Jiang family of South America. There were 2 white figures moving forward in the camp of the Jiang family of South America. One of them was so young that Lushing Sangshuan felt weird. He had reached the deepest part of the camp of the Jiang family of South America, but he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. He staggered and seemed to fall at any time. The white shadow that had broken into the camp of the Jiang family of South America in the rear was so strong that even Lushing Sangshuan felt shocked. The white shadow swept all the way. In the camp of the Jiang family of South America, everyone, whether in the fire-flaming realm or the thunder-shocking realm, almost fell down without resistance. The breath emitted by the white shadow was getting stronger and stronger. Lushing Sangshuan stared at the other side's strange and cold handsome face. He found that he did not know such an expert, and he had never seen the breath on him. It was a completely strange martial arts. A completely strange expert. Lushing Sangshuan felt a little uneasy for no reason. His figure flashed, and the next moment, he directly stood in front of the white shadow. Get lost. The white shadow didn't seem to look at Lushing Sangshuan. He casually punched him with a majestic power. Lushing Sangshuan punched him with a poker face. The violent power bombarded together. The lightning and the twisted air suddenly burst a large area of the surrounding space. All the experts of the Jiang family of South America nearby were completely swallowed by the huge power in an instant. Lushing Sangshuan's face became more and more serious. The white shadow's body slightly retreated a few steps. Who are you? Lushing Sangshuan asked with a serious face. He was sure that he had never encountered the weird way of exerting force in the fight just now. Who am I? The white shadow's pupils contracted. Looking at Lushing Sangshuan in front of him, he sneered and said, Daybreak, Lord of Sanluo Temple. Lushing Sangshuan's eyebrows furrowed more tightly. Before that, he had never heard of any force named Sanluo Temple. When he was about to speak, a cold and proud female voice suddenly sounded and shrouded the crowd of the Jiang family of South America. Li Tianlan. This voice came abruptly, and it was filled with cruelty and pleasure. There seemed to be the sound of chains in the night sky. Daybreak and Lushing Sangshuan suddenly raised their heads. In the crowd, Li Tianlan, who had almost lost his mind, also raised his head. Two figures suddenly appeared in the night sky. There seemed to be a fragrance in the air that made him yearn for it. A beautiful woman that Li Tianlan had never seen before appeared in the air. She looked at him with strange coldness and cruelty. She held a chain in her hand, and the other end of the chain was firmly wrapped around the neck of another figure. That was a figure that could make the starry sky pale and the battlefield silent. A white dress, perfect like a dream. Qin Weibai. That was Qin Weibai. The dark chain was tightly wrapped around Qin Weibai's snow-white neck. Behind her, Moonlight, who was holding the chain, restrained her strength. Qin Weibai, who had lost the power to float in the air, suddenly fell from Moonlight. The dark chain was tightened at the moment when Qin Weibai fell. The chain tightly strangled Qin Weibai's neck. Her body swayed in the air, miserable and cold. Moonlight smiled cruelly. In the air, she hung Qin Weibai's neck with the chain and kept pulling it. Qin Weibai's body swayed in the air, and there was a large bloodstain on her neck. Look at this woman. Moonlight looked at Li Tianlan with a sneer and said, In my hands, your woman is like a dog. I can hang her at any time. Come on, come to save her. Come to save this beautiful bitch in my hands. As long as you have the strength. Li Tianlan's muddle-headed eyes suddenly became blood red. A crazy scream like that of a dying beast suddenly came from the whole battlefield. That was the rage that seemed to obliterate all emotions and reason. Ah! Chapter 252. No words could describe Li Tianlan's anger. The white clothes were still swaying in the night sky under the restraint of the chain. Hundreds of meters away, Moonlight stood at the other end, and in the middle were the remaining elites of the Jiang family of South America. The numb body regained consciousness, and the muddle-headed wool was completely concentrated. The silver human emperor turned into a sky halberd again, and the scarlet crescent-shaped spear blade stretched outward. Rushing forward. Regardless of everything. Li Tianlan's eyes had turned from blood red to dark red. All reason and judgment had completely disappeared. Battlefield, night, starry sky, crowd, glory, responsibility, grudges, hope, everything in front of him was falling apart. All the burdens on his body were disappearing. In the whole world, there was only the helpless figure hanging in the air by the chain. It was still perfect and dreamy, but a little sad and beautiful. Ah! Li Tianlan's roar almost turned into a wail. The great pain in his heart turned into extremely twisted hatred and anger, and a large number of attacks fell on him as he moved forward. Frost, raging fire, and raging thunder. The white clothes made of cloud silk absorbed most of the power, but the remaining power kept hitting Li Tianlan's body. Blood flowed from inside the white clothes, all over his body. Li Tianlan only had an almost instinctive thought. Even if he died, he would let her live. So he rushed forward fearlessly and decisively. The white figure rushed through the frost, the raging fire, and the dense curtain of thunder and lightning was left behind by him. The saber light and the sword's shadow kept whistling and flashing in front of him. He just rushed forward crazily. His woman was there. He didn't care about the mountain of knives, the sea of fire, or the end of fate. Before the shrill, scalp-numbing howl of anger completely dissipated, Li Tianlan had rushed forward nearly 30 meters. The dense light and shadow were broken and dazzling. Blood gushed in the light and shadow. The white clothes were getting farther away. In the position slightly to the south, the black and white sword light of the yin and yang sword suddenly rose to the sky. The entire remaining camp of Mount Shu and Sai City began to crazily attack the Jiang family of South America. Daybreak, who was also in white, directly bypassed Luxing Zhangquan, looked at Li Tianlan's back, and shouted, "Come back." As soon as his body moved, Luxing Zhangquan appeared in front of him again. Temple Master Sun Luo? Luxing Zhangquan sneered at Daybreak. His eyes were dignified and sarcastic. "You can't go anywhere. Get lost." Daybreak's handsome and almost devilish face became distorted because of anger and eagerness, and his hair stood on end. Hand seal. It seemed that the light in the world was gathering, and it also seemed that daybreak was breaking out. Endless light suddenly burst out from Daybreak's body. Galaxy seal. The light was like a raging tide, spreading out in an instant. Daybreak rushed to Luxing Zhangquan with mighty light. This was a pseudo-domain. Luxing Zhangquan's pupils shrank instantly and he pulled out his sword without hesitation. A huge wave of power instantly spread in all directions. The sword light and the light of the Milky Way seal flew into the sky at the same time. The second seal of Daybreak had been completed. Heavenly Punishment Seal. The clear starry sky suddenly rumbled with thunder, and the radiance of the Galaxy Seal began to scatter. The starlight receded, and a bolt of lightning that extended hundreds of meters across the sky instantly cut through the battlefield. Rolling thunder. The lightning as vast as the sea surged down without any warning. The lightning all over the sky gathered at one point, and there seemed to be a huge funnel condensed by lightning in the clear night sky. All the light fell on Luxing Zhangquan with crazy killing intent. The more complicated hand seal of the third style of Daybreak had come to an end. This was not a single style. It was a comprehensive style. Collection of all things. The noisy and tragic battlefield suddenly became quiet. All the sounds disappeared completely. In the lightning, Luxing Zhangquan's sword light quietly broke. All the attacks and shadows nearby were broken at the same time. There was no lightning around Daybreak, and all the air around him was spinning wildly in front of him. Luxing Zhangquan's sword light, all the attacks and shadows nearby turned into an indescribable majestic power, which was integrated into the spinning air by Daybreak. He turned the power of heaven and earth into his own use. This was the real collection of all things. Heaven and earth could be used, not to mention other people's attacks. Daybreak's mouth began to bleed, and the spinning air in front of him had become a huge vortex. The sword intent as vast as the sea kept coming in and out of the vortex, and the power from the outside world was gathering crazily. The vortex had grown to hundreds of meters in an instant. Lu Xingxuan's sword was broken, and the other sword was not out. Daybreak, who was bleeding from the corner of his mouth, had suddenly raised his hand. With the attack of collection of all things, the power of heaven and earth, Lu Xingxuan's own sword light, and the power of all the people nearby in an instant. The violent air vortex directly pressed on Lu Xingxuan. Boom! There was a sudden violent roar on the battlefield. The air vortex completely exploded. Lightning, flames, ice walls, and twisted air crazily crowded and exploded. All the enemies within the area of nearly 100 meters, including Lu Xingxuan, were swallowed up at the same time. A huge pit of hundreds of meters appeared in the battlefield, covered by countless lights and shadows. Daybreak did not look at the result, turned around, and rushed directly to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was still moving forward. Qin Weibai, who was hanging in the void with moonlight, began to retreat. The distance was getting farther and farther, which made people desperate. There were still lights and shadows in front of him. Dense lightning bloomed in front of him and hit him. The activity of the cloud's silk robe began to fade gradually. The injury was getting worse. Li Tianlan had gone completely crazy. The sky halberd was raised above his head in the sky full of lights and shadows, and he fiercely chopped down. The lightning was smashed in an instant. The moment the light disappeared, a dim longsword suddenly pierced through the night sky. The sword edge went straight. Swish! The cloud's silk robe, which had lost most of its activity, shook quietly, but the sword edge had fiercely pierced through the cloud's silk and directly into Li Tianlan's abdomen. The sword edge went through his body, from front to back. The dim silver edge in the air fell straight down. In front of Li Tianlan, the thunder-shocking realm expert who succeeded in a sneak attack did not have time to retreat. The human emperor had directly chopped down and directly smashed him into pieces. Attacks from all directions fell on him at the same time. Li Tianlan's face was expressionless. He pulled out the long sword from his abdomen with one hand and swung the sky halberd with the other. Raging flames rose in the crowd, and the silver edge cut through almost everything. Several heads flew out with blood. The elites of the Jiang family of South America remained silent. They attacked in silence. Cold and gloomy. Li Tianlan looked into the distance. Moonlight's figure had stopped. She pulled Qin Weibai up again and let her stand beside her. The black chain was still wrapped around Qin Weibai's neck. The black chain, the white dress, the red blood, and the clear black and white eyes. Qin Weibai was also looking at her. The light in her eyes was flowing with weakness, as if she had 1,000 words to say. The drooping sky halberd was suddenly raised. The heavy weapon whistled through the wind and thunder. Kill! Blood flowed down Li Tianlan's body. He gasped deeply, gritted his teeth, and growled. The elites of the Jiang family of South America just wanted to go up again. I'll do it. A voice suddenly rang out. All the elites of the Jiang family of South America took a few steps back and saluted in one direction. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. In his sight, a middle-aged man in his late 40s slowly walked over with a long sword hanging at his waist. He looked at Li Tianlan with excitement and pity in his eyes. My name is Raining Sword. The middle-aged man spoke. The voice was playful. Do you want to save the second madam? The second madam? Li Tianlan asked back and spat out a mouthful of blood. It's Qin Weibai. From today on, she is the second madam of the Jiang family of South America. Raining Sword said seriously. That's my woman. Li Tianlan slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said in a cold tone. Oh, she's someone else's now. Raining Sword laughed and looked at Li Tianlan. What a fool. You're so desperate. But I like it. Without you, our task would not be complete. Now it's all right. You still want to save her? Look, do you deserve such a woman? Only the second master of the Jiang family of South America deserves her. You. Go to hell. Li Tianlan, who no longer cared about psychological tactics, suddenly straightened his body. The sky halberd raised a sharp arc in the air, and the monstrous sword intent suddenly took shape as the sky halberd was raised. A trace of gorgeous dusky yellow suddenly appeared in the night sky. The ninth blade, dusk. The sky halberd chopped down sharply, and the sword intent was surging. Raining Sword's eyes were cold. He raised his head and quietly watched the sky halberd falling. At the moment when the sword energy was about to fall on his head, he suddenly reached out. He drew his sword. A sword light as bright as the sun and the moon burst out in an instant. The dim yellow in the air dissipated, and only the bright light rose up. There was no raging fire, no thunder, only sword light. Such an expert could almost be said to have gone beyond the scope of the half-step invincible realm. He was only a step away from entering the invincible realm. He was a top expert. The bright sword light swept over the sword intent and the sky halberd. A piece of silver edge flew out directly. The human emperor was cut in half by the sword light. The weapon that had accompanied Li Tianlan for many years now only had a piece left. Li Tianlan's expression was stiff. Looking at the remaining half of the human emperor in his hand, he seemed to be in a daze. Raining Sword, who easily cut the human emperor in half, took a step forward and kicked Li Tianlan's chest directly. Li Tianlan's body suddenly flew backward more than 10 meters, and his indomitable momentum was forcibly stopped. It's almost time. Raining Sword's figure flashed and directly grabbed Li Tianlan. In an instant, his figure appeared beside Moonlight. Moonlight bowed her head respectfully. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes slightly and looked softly at Li Tianlan in Raining Sword's hand. Let's go back. The task is completed. Raining Sword said softly. Let go of her. A weak voice sounded. Li Tianlan struggled to break free from the control of Raining Sword and stood shakily in the air. His voice was weak, and he seemed to fall at any time, but there was a hint of relief in his eyes, or the glow of success. He finally got close to Qin Weibai. Finally got close. Raining Sword and Moonlight looked at each other and laughed. Let go? Why? You're in our hands. Who can save her now? I can. Li Tianlan said softly. He looked at Qin Weibai with soft eyes. You don't deserve it. Moonlight's tone was cold and mocking. Young heavenly son. That's all. What about the wind and thunder veins? So what if you're talented? You're still a prisoner of the Jiang family of South America. You practice martial arts, but you can't protect your own woman. What's the use of martial arts? She paused, as if she wanted to completely break Li Tianlan's will, and said coldly, it's better to give up. Li Tianlan laughed softly. His body gradually stopped swaying, and his crimson eyes became rational and clear. His eyes moved from Qin Weibai to Moonlight. He practiced martial arts, but he couldn't protect his own woman. What's the use of it? He was the heavenly son. He pursued perfection, a perfect foundation, and invincibility in the world. But now he couldn't even protect his own woman. What was the use of pursuing those? From the moment he saw Qin Weibai, he knew that everything about him was an illusion. Only she was the most real. The road to invincibility was long. The enemy was ahead. It was better to give up. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and whispered, it's better to give up. In an instant, Li Tianlan's voice rang throughout the battlefield. The soft, almost whispering words echoed clearly and terrifyingly between heaven and earth. It's better to give up. For simple words, but unprecedentedly clear and majestic. In the center of the battlefield, Tribulation, who was being crazily attacked by Shinichi Miyamoto and Tianyu, suddenly turned back and desperately rushed to Li Tianlan. Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes were solemn and sharp. The void formed again in front of him. Void, stillness, destruction. The pitch-black void instantly exploded, turning into countless destructive light spots. Tribulation suddenly turned back. In an instant, the aura he deliberately suppressed suddenly began to be released without reservation. Tribulation's figure began to blur and fade. But in an instant, countless shadows formed around him. 3, 5, 8, 9, one shadow after another appeared around Tribulation. The air around Tribulation exploded completely and became void in an instant. The shadows glowed in the void, shining brightly. Tribulation raised his hand. In front of him, the 9 shadows raised their hands at the same time. Kill! Tribulation's low and hoarse voice suddenly rushed to the sky. 9 shadows, together with himself, rushed to Shinichi Miyamoto. The void around them became completely fragmented in an instant. 9 glowing shadows appeared around Tribulation and rotated wildly. His figure became fainter and fainter, but his whole body emitted unparalleled light. Shinichi Miyamoto began to retreat. At this moment, the only thing he felt was fear. A large amount of air, along with heaven and earth, pressed down with the 9 rotating shadows. Tribulation seemed to break through the shackles, and his aura suddenly soared. He was invincible. He broke through. All the shadows became more and more dazzling. Tribulation's figure rushed to Shinichi Miyamoto, like a burning falling star, and hit Shinichi Miyamoto at all costs. The extremely strong aura climbed to the peak in an instant and fell quickly in the violent fluctuations of power. The light in the air dissipated. Tribulation's figure fell from the sky, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Shinichi Miyamoto, there was no Shinichi Miyamoto. Countless white bones also fell from the sky. Before they landed, they turned into a pile of dust in the night wind. Tribulation couldn't stop what he wanted to stop after all. The moment the strong aura of the 2 people's desperate attacks fell, another aura rose from the north. Li Tianlan released all the shackles. At the same time, he used the unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai. Against the way of heaven. He wasn't afraid of death, so why should he be afraid of going against the way of heaven? Under everyone's gaze, a vast sword intent suddenly rose up from the junction of the mountains and seas in the north. The sword light rushed to the sky thousands of meters high, covering the night sky, the barren mountains, the sea, and almost the entire battlefield. It's better to give up. That very young voice once again spread calmly throughout the battlefield and kept surging between heaven and earth. The sword intent surging throughout the battlefield kept roaring. In the north, high in the sky. The figure stood there quietly, holding half of the broken silver sword in his hand, but his whole body exuded a desperate and shuddering aura. His clothes were as white as snow. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.